A devastating accident leaves Tyson clinging to life and haunted by Imani's ghostly presence, a nightly reminder of the mistakes he can never outrun. When a young woman named Christy steps into his life, will Tyson finally find redemption or be forever imprisoned by a past that refuses to die? The end of one life and the change in another happened in just a few seconds. In 1 second, Tyson looks at his wife of 20 years, sitting in the passenger seat. He already feels bad for the hurtful words he just said. In 2 seconds, Tyson sees something big and dark move quickly past the window. Imani's angry face turns to him. In 3 seconds, there's a strong impact. The noise is overwhelming, yet he can't really hear it. Everything goes bright and dark, filled with pain and then emptiness. Time passes before he opens his eyes to see stars above him, through tall grass. Cold water from a ditch drips onto his clothes. Pain comes back to him, and he realizes she is gone. No! 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 Tyson suddenly wakes up, gasping for air. This nightmare had disturbed him many times over the past 5 years. He felt pain that reminded him of the year he spent recovering in the hospital. It was endless hours of pushing through to regain function in his body. When he could finally grip things again, move his arms, and balance on his feet, he worked hard. He wanted to mask his mental pain with physical effort. He lost weight and worked on getting stronger, peeling away layers of grief. But he wondered why he was doing this. As he became stronger, he pushed himself harder. He thought the pain was helping him, but it was just a distraction. After a year of tough workouts, the physiotherapists only allowed him limited gym time, pushing him to face his feelings. He had to stop avoiding the sorrow that lingered inside him. It took another 8 months for the doctors to feel it was time for him to go home. "Aw, Sugar, is that bad dream back again?" Her voice felt so familiar yet so wrong to him. Every time he heard it, his heart ached, but he didn't answer. He had fought through the darkness during his hospital stay, and the new life he was building relied on his sharp mind. He wouldn't give up on that now. Imani was gone. She was gone. She wasn't sitting at the end of his bed, looking slim and comfortable in her soft night clothes, her curly hair inviting his touch, her warm brown skin shining, and her kind brown eyes full of love. Tyson fell back against his pillow, closed his eyes, and rubbed his face. He went over his thoughts, and when he reached a conclusion, he opened his eyes. As always, she was gone. The doctors had used a lot of complicated words while trying to help him understand his feelings, his memories of the accident, and his thoughts about his mother. Survivor's guilt and post-traumatic stress were the main topics, but there were many others he had forgotten. He never talked to the doctors about Imani's visits at night. If he had, he would probably still be in the hospital. It felt easier to just acknowledge the strange moments and move on. Besides, he had his love for math to help him think clearly again. Imani started appearing to him at night after he had pushed himself hard during his physical therapy. While resting in his bed with his muscles sore, he imagined that she came to visit him. From the beginning, he knew to keep this to himself. He learned about it later after he returned home. He read a lot about how the mind copes with losing someone, especially after a tragic event. His difficulty in accepting her loss, shown by his tears when he woke up, showed that his mind was trying to fill the emptiness in his life with her. 5 years was a long time to hold on to these visions, but like his choice to stay alone and stick to his strict schedule, he found comfort in the familiar. Maybe he just wasn't ready to move on. As it always did after having the nightmare, his mind returned to the party night. Tyson hadn't even wanted to go. Imani had insisted they should get out, saying they needed to show their support for the man who had helped him become a professor of advanced mathematics at the local university. That's what the man told everyone. Tyson knew it was really the dean's wife who helped him. The party was to celebrate the dean's retirement. Franklin Dunnings planned to enjoy a relaxing life in a beach town in Central America. Tyson, Imani, his colleagues, and their spouses were all there at the man's home for one final celebration before he and his wife began this new chapter of their lives. Tyson wasn't sure if this was what his childhood friend truly wanted. Ashley Dunnings, formerly Ashley Collins, had lived next door to Tyson for as long as he could remember. Tyson and his best friend Ashley went through school together from kindergarten to college. However, his special talent for understanding numbers took him away from their hometown to study at top universities around the world. When he finally returned, he found out he had missed Ashley's wedding. To celebrate his return and Ashley's happiness with her new partner, Tyson had a bit too much to drink, stumbled down some stairs, and ended up in Imani's hospital. Imani introduced herself to the smart guy who had trouble with stairs, and he felt a spark with her. At the party that night, guests soon noticed that Ashley was missing, which was unusual. Franklin made excuses for her and insisted the gathering go on, even though Ashley's cheerful spirit was what usually made these events fun. Tyson felt out of place. He and Franklin had never been close, and he wasn't sad to leave the university. Yet, Imani seemed to fit in well at the party, much better than she had at previous gatherings. Tyson thought maybe it was because Ashley was not there, as there had been some tension between Imani and Ashley before. An awkward hour and a half later, Ashley stormed into the party, making her presence known. It was clear she had been upset and had probably been drinking. Tyson exchanged a worried glance with Imani. Ashley announced loudly that her husband had been unfaithful with a younger student. She had just come from a detective's office and had photos to prove it. When Franklin returned with more drinks, a loud argument broke out, which was painful to watch. In the end, Franklin left the house in anger. Ashley was left feeling empty, her anger fading, and she broke down in tears. Tyson moved to comfort her, giving Imani a surprised look when she seemed hesitant. He wrapped his arms around Ashley and carried her upstairs while Imani helped the remaining guests leave. The party was over, just like Ashley and Franklin's marriage. Tyson set Ashley down on her bed, her lovely hair spread out around her. When their eyes met, unexpectedly, she wrapped her arms around him and softly kissed him. For a brief moment, he didn't pull away, but then he gently released her and stepped back. He looked into her eyes, but he shook his head, knowing the moment had passed. Ashley turned away and cried quietly. As he left the room, Imani was waiting for him in the hallway. He looked at her, feeling sorry for his friend, and stopped when he saw the anger in Imani's eyes. She handed him a tissue and pointed at his mouth. He wiped his lips and noticed the lipstick. "She's had too much to drink." "You haven't. I'm leaving," Imani said sharply as she turned and walked away, heading downstairs and out the front door. He hurried after her, worried that her words meant more than they seemed. As he drove them home, he felt her gaze on him. "She surprised me," he said softly. Silence filled the car. His frustration grew. He hadn't done anything wrong. He was just trying to help a friend. Yes, she could have been more, but that had never happened. "What did you expect me to do? Ignore a friend when she was upset?" he said, raising his voice. "Is she just a friend? The lipstick tells a different story," Imani shot back. "I told you. It was unexpected. Her marriage just ended badly and she was hurting. She needed someone. Naturally, that someone had to be you," Imani shouted. He inhaled sharply, feeling his temper rise. He worked to calm himself. "What is it you have against Ashley?" "I don't know. Maybe it's because she wants to be with the man who promised to be my loyal husband," she replied bitterly. "A promise I've never broken and never will," he countered. As he drove faster along the winding country road toward home, he could hear Imani trying to control her breathing. "I notice how she looks at you during faculty parties," she said quietly, but her tone was sharp. "She just doesn't know when to back off." At that moment, he felt like he didn't truly know the woman sitting beside him, the woman who had captivated him the day they met in the hospital, the woman he promised to love for life. Their journey together hadn't always been easy, but they had celebrated many years together, her turning 50 just a month ago. He had looked forward to spending their golden years together, but as he gazed out at the old road and the quiet tracks ahead, he wondered if he really understood her at all. His thoughts wandered to the gatherings he'd attended at the hospital and the homes of her friends. He knew Imani was well liked by everyone. However, he couldn't ignore how she flirted with some of the men and the looks he noticed when she walked by. Those moments had made him feel insecure, but he had pushed through it, knowing she always found her way back to him during those events to show her affection. He started to wonder why her feelings toward Ashley were so intense. He had never called her out like this during those times. His mouth started talking before he realized what he was saying. "The difference is, I don't behave with Ashley like you do with Devin Wilson." Dr. Wilson was the chief surgeon at the hospital. He was tall, fit, attractive, smart, and single a divorcee, really. There was something he apparently struggled with. As he observed her turning toward him, he saw her anger. But there was something else there, too. Something he was very afraid of. Was it doubt or guilt? Then they were on the tracks. "No!" Tyson shouted as he covered his eyes with his hands to push the memories away. It was time to move on. Start his day. Follow the routine. There was peace in habits. Christy Taylor was having a rough day, and Fridays were supposed to be good. She frowned, and people around her quickly noticed. She knew she was attractive. While her genes had given her many good traits, she worked hard to take care of herself. She used the right skincare products to keep her skin looking great. She followed a strict diet with healthy foods to stay fit. She exercised regularly to keep her body in shape. She also visited the salon every week to keep her long, wavy blonde hair shiny and at the right length, and her nails were always painted in the latest style. Her friends thought she should become a model because of her looks, grace, and height, but that wasn't her dream. She looked at her hand, admiring the deep red polish, and her eyes fell on the sparkling diamonds of her engagement ring. Once, seeing it made her feel excited. Today, she felt nothing. Her fiancé, Blake Carlington, was good-looking, fit, well-connected, and came from a wealthy family like hers, but during their 8-month engagement, she realized there was no magic between them, no spark. Even their physical relationship didn't satisfy her. In the last few months, she had definitely been in a slump. The things that used to make her happy now felt meaningless. She went through the motions, kept herself looking good, and tried to stay in style. But even shopping no longer excited her. She wasn't shallow. Christy hadn't come this far just because of her looks and social status. She was smart and knew how to use her intelligence. She was doing well in most of her classes and had imagined graduating at the top of her class a few months ago. Now, she was being called to meet with Professor Haley, her math teacher, because her grade was dropping. She needed that math credit to move on to the next year. But even the fear of falling behind left her feeling empty. The boredom she was experiencing was taking the meaning out of everything in her life. Christy knew she needed to stay professional. She knocked on the office door and heard someone say to come in. She entered and found a mess of papers everywhere. Based on the state of his office, one might think George Haley did not care about technology. That was somewhat true for his own projects. He preferred working with paper for his experiments. However, for his classes, the university required him to post assignments online, though he often sneaked in paper forms. In the office sat a short, sturdy man with wild white hair like Einstein and a fluffy mustache. He looked up from his desk and smiled warmly. "Hello, Miss Taylor. How can I help you?" he asked, blinking at her. She twirled a strand of her blonde hair as she spoke. "You wanted to talk to me about my grades." He nodded and pinched the bridge of his nose. "Yes, your grades are slipping, and if you don't improve, I might have to fail you." "Isn't there a test I can take to boost my grade?" she wondered. He looked at her seriously. "You need to understand the material to improve. The next exam is very important. You need to know the course content well by then." Christy frowned, knowing she had been struggling with the recent chapters. "I need a tutor." "Yes, I was just going to suggest that," Haley responded with enthusiasm. "I know a brilliant man in math who is also a great teacher. If you want to learn this material in the time you have left, you really need someone of his skill." Christy looked at him warily. "Is he from the university?" A brief look of sadness crossed Haley's face. "Not anymore. He retired early." He then focused on her. "It's essential that you understand how serious the situation is. You have to persuade him to tutor you." A thoughtful expression came over him, and then a slight smile appeared. "I'll give you a letter of introduction. That should help, but it's up to you to convince him." He grabbed a piece of paper and started writing. Curious, Christy asked, "If he's such a good teacher, why did he retire early?" Her interest in this mysterious tutor started to lift her spirits. Haley folded the letter and sealed it in an envelope. He quickly wrote something on the front and handed it to her. Christy was surprised when she read the name written above the address. "Tyson Kane? Are you talking about the man who stopped the terrorists?" "Stop! Don't bring that up around him. He lost his wife that night, and he doesn't need reminders." He pointed to a picture on the wall of a strong-looking man in a suit with his arm around a lovely woman with big curly hair. Tyson should only remember his passion for teaching. The letter will help you get in, but you must show him you're a serious student. Christy looked at the professor in surprise and dismay. Are you saying I need to do something for him? What? No, Haley replied sharply, leaving Christy even more confused. He sighed heavily. Show him you are focused on your future. Earn his trust and time. He doesn't respect people who go through life without trying. Show him your motivation and goals. If he believes in you, he'll help you succeed in my class. Christy glanced nervously at the envelope as the weight of her task began to sink in. Go see him tomorrow. Do you have anything planned for Saturday morning? He asked, and she shook her head. Thank you, Professor Haley, she said as she nodded to him and left the office. She headed straight for the library. She needed to learn everything about Mr. Kane. This was a chance she couldn't afford to miss. George Haley settled into his comfortable chair as the young woman left. He stared at the door, feeling uneasy about the letter he wrote to his friend Tyson. He pushed away his doubts, thinking the small lie was okay if it helped Tyson open up. It was a shame that he was isolating himself. It was as if he was hiding away from the world and not sharing his talent. What Miss Taylor didn't realize was that Tyson didn't like people who didn't strive for more. Yet he was slipping into that very mindset himself. If George were more religious, he would have wished for Christy to succeed in drawing Tyson out of his self-made shell. He smiled to himself, noting that Christy's appearance reminded him of Ashley when she was young. But his smile faded as he thought about the woman who vanished at the dean's retirement party. For a while, everyone suspected Franklin had done something terrible to her. Then it came out that she had left the country the next day, taking most of their shared money. A law firm in New York soon sent Franklin divorce papers. The man hurried to sign the papers, and days later he sold the house and vanished into the jungles of Central America. Now Tyson's best friend was gone, just like his wife. George tried to help, but he couldn't connect with Tyson. Maybe he needed a different approach, something softer. Miss Taylor had that quality in her. Tyson stood barefoot on the grass in his backyard, near a small patio table and chairs that he hardly used, except for his morning routine. He took off his big robe and hung it over one of the chairs. Then he walked to the lake, standing on a small patch of sand at the edge of his property. He was closer to the neighbors now, but so far no one had complained about his habit of swimming without clothes or sunbathing the same way. He never looked to see if anyone was watching. He didn't really care. He stepped into the cool water and walked until he could dive in. The water was brisk, but he pushed through the chill until he found a steady rhythm. He needed to keep swimming or he would struggle in the water. As he did every day, he swam straight out from his home until he felt tired, which told him it was time to turn around. If he made it back, he would have a good workout and feel stronger. If he didn't make it back, he would have done his best, and the lake would take care of the rest. Would today be that day? 3 miles south of the university town was a beautiful lake surrounded by thick forest. Along the northern edge of the lake, there was a 3-mile road with 20 small homes scattered in the only place suitable for building. The rest of the shoreline was steep granite walls rising above the water. The northern edge sloped gradually, with a sandy area before the deep water. The homes were connected to the town by a narrow country road that wound through granite outcroppings. But now that road was closed to cars. Christy drove her white Mercedes-Benz along the smooth road, built just 4 years ago. It connected the east side of town to the lakefront road. From her studies, she discovered the sad event that led to Tyson Kane's car being on the tracks at just the wrong time when a fast train came along. 2 troubled high school boys, who had faced serious bullying, decided to get back at the town they believed had let them down. One boy was the son of a railroad worker, and the other was the son of a construction supervisor. They managed to take an old train engine from the yard and attached it to a flatbed car loaded with devices they had built. They drove the train onto an old line that wound through the countryside and past the lake, aiming to reach the center of town. Their plan was to crash the train in town, causing destruction. Instead, they hit Tyson's car, splitting it apart. Tyson was thrown from his seat into a ditch, while his car was carried under the train, which then derailed a short distance away. Tyson's wife and the two boys lost their lives, but their devices did not explode. Since this was a quiet area with very few people around, no one saw the accident happen. 2 hours later, the boys' planned message appeared online explaining their actions. The police were informed right away, and 3 patrol cars were sent to look into it. About 90 minutes later, an officer found Tyson in the ditch, close to death. That was when things started to get really serious. As Tyson was taken to the hospital, emergency workers found the train on its side in the bushes a bit further down the damaged tracks. The bodies of the 2 boys were largely unharmed, but that wasn't the case for Amani. A bomb team was called in to safely take apart the devices. Christie read that GRT Corporation, which owned the local freight rail system, faced major criticism in court and from the public, forcing them to pay a lot to the survivor, Mr. Kane, and to the town. GRT quickly began a project to remove the tracks from the old line. Rusty rails and wooden ties were taken away. Then road crews came in to level the ground where the tracks had been and laid a smooth 6-foot-wide asphalt road from the accident site to the edge of town. They decided not to remove the tracks within the town. With permission from the town council, those road crews built the straight and smooth 2-lane road that Christie was currently traveling on. Once it was finished, the town council closed the old country road to cars, making it part of the trail system. As it connected to the western edge of town, the entire route made a 15-mile loop. Like any new city project, the local leaders were involved in all the changes. Big areas of land next to this new road, especially those not surrounded by rocks, were opened up for new upscale houses. Neighborhoods filled with large homes appeared. One good thing for the current homeowners by the lake was that the land south of the old train tracks still belonged to GRT. This meant no new buildings would be allowed there. The agreements for the lakefront land had rules that kept it safe from development. No more houses would be built on that lake. When Christie learned more about the man, she dug into his past and found proof of his incredible math skills. His education was something special, and reviews of his time at the university made her wish he still worked there. He was often called a big teddy bear, showing that he was friendly and great at math. She looked through the photo archives at the university and saw how his reputation had grown over the years. He had been 53 at the time of the incident and was quite a large man then. Now, at 58, she imagined him as a chubby bear needing a walker or a wheelchair based on the stories of his injuries. Still, she needed his knowledge to help her with her current problem. As Christie drove past a neighborhood of huge homes, she shook her head. The land around them was empty and dry. She thought they should have planted large trees around the houses like they did in her parents' neighborhood. Ahead, she noticed the trail crossing the new road and saw no cars coming. So she drove over the small bump and into the woods. A short distance in, she turned onto the old road by the lake. Christie looked at the envelope again to find the house number she needed. Tyson's home was further down, so she drove on, enjoying the view. All the homes were by the lake and many were gated, which seemed strange to her since they all faced the water. Fortunately, all the homes were one story, blending nicely with their surroundings. Some were wider to make up for not being 2 stories tall. Eventually, she saw the numbers getting closer to her destination, so she slowed down and turned into a gravel driveway. There were no other cars around, and she worried he might not be home. The house was charming. It was a ranch-style cottage nestled among the trees, featuring many unique and thoughtful design touches. She almost expected to see fairies flying around the beautiful gardens surrounding the house. Turning off the car, she stepped outside and took a deep breath of the morning air. It smelled fresh and clean. She checked her outfit one last time. She dressed for success in her best business clothes, a red silk blouse, tailored black pants, and comfortable red leather shoes that matched her top. She chose a top that wasn't too tight, wanting to keep things professional. Since she didn't have another pair of pants that fit well, she decided on the black ones, which could help tone down her shape. Taking a deep breath to calm her nerves, she got ready for her big moment as she climbed the 3 steps to the front door. She pressed the doorbell and heard it faintly from inside. After waiting a bit, she pressed the doorbell again. Still, nothing. Christie hadn't expected this. She had many ideas on how to impress him, but nothing for when he wasn't home. Standing on the front step, she looked around. Maybe he had gone to see a neighbor? The empty driveway suggested he was somewhere else. "Come on, you can do this, don't give up." The morning was quiet, and she heard faint words from her left. Turning to the neighbor's house, she noticed it was 1 story high and had a rooftop deck. An older woman with white hair stood there, looking through binoculars at something near the water. Curious, Christy walked down the steps and headed toward the side of the house. She saw a gate leading to the backyard. A small sign said, "Private," but she decided to go through anyway. The path ran between the house and a tall hedge leading to the backyard. She saw that the plants lined up with the water's edge, but the house appeared larger than she had thought from the front. Suddenly, she heard coughing and gasping. Looking toward the water, she saw someone struggling to climb out. He managed to get to his feet, moving a few steps before stumbling and falling forward, catching himself on his hands and knees as he tried to catch his breath. She felt a strong urge to help. A loud, determined sound came from him, and she paused at the corner of the house, watching as he got back up. To her surprise, he was not wearing anything. He stood there with his eyes closed, breathing heavily to regain strength. Once he looked a bit more stable, he began to walk out of the shallow water toward the house. He lifted his hands, running them from his forehead back through his long, black hair, wringing out some of the water. The gray at his temples was noticeable. Christy felt uncertain. She had come to see the professor who loved teddy bears, but there was a fit man staying at his house. She noticed his lean, strong frame. He was clearly in shape, with well-defined muscles. He wasn't overly large, but his fitness was apparent. His skin looked smooth, and she could see some scars on his left knee, suggesting he had surgery there. She saw he walked with a slight limp. Her attention drifted, but she quickly looked back at his face when he spoke. "Who are you? And why are you here?" His voice was deep and sounded angry. Christy felt defensive and stepped back into the backyard. "I'm Christy Taylor. I'm here to see Professor Kane." The man frowned and walked toward a chair covered with a robe. He didn't shy away from her gaze, but she forced herself to focus on his face instead. She wanted to see if he would respond positively, but all she saw was annoyance. He put on the robe tightly and then looked at her again. "No one by that name is here. Please leave." "Professor Haley told me he lived here. He sent me to talk to Professor Kane," she insisted, her confidence growing now that he was covered. He hesitated, looking uncomfortable. "George Haley?" "Yes, I have a message from him for Professor Kane," she said, smiling at her small victory. Maybe this man was related to Tyson Kane. He looked to be in his late 30s or early 40s, and there was a slight resemblance to the professor. He extended his hand toward her, but she hesitated, then glanced at his annoyed expression. "Give me the message," he said gruffly. She frowned. "No, I must give it to Professor Kane myself. And I told you there is no Professor Kane here. Just Tyson Kane, and that's me. Hand over the message." Christy's eyes widened as she realized who he claimed to be. He motioned for her to give it to him. You can't be him." He looked confused. "What do you mean, I am?" "He's nearly 60. You can't be that old," she exclaimed. He chuckled, but his expression turned serious again. "Look, I don't have time for this. Either give me the message from George or leave." "If you are him, why did you say no one was here by that name?" she challenged. His frown returned. "I told you there's no Professor Kane here. He passed away 5 years ago. I haven't helped anyone since. That night." His face hinted at some dark memories. Christy's mouth fell open as she believed him. This man was Tyson Kane, but he looked so different. She had to admit that his new look was much better. Teddy bears are sweet, but this? She noticed his long black hair now drying down his back. The gray at his temples had new meaning. It wasn't there in the old photos of him before the accident. "The letter?" She jumped at his words, then reached into her purse and handed him the envelope. He took it and glanced at the writing on the front. With a heavy sigh, he opened it. While he read, Christy let her eyes roam over him. It had been a long time since she felt this thrill of excitement. Tyson unfolded the paper with a mix of worry and curiosity. The writing on the envelope was definitely George's. He quickly read the message. "Dear Tyson, I hope you are well. The woman in front of you is Miss Christy Taylor. She's in my class, and over the last few months her grades have dropped unexpectedly. She is very bright and has a lot of potential, so this change is unusual, and I don't know why it happened. You might wonder why this matters to you. I ask for your help. If you could find some time to see why she is struggling and guide her, I would appreciate it. I find myself in an awkward situation because I owe her father some money after losing at poker at his place. He said he would accept your help instead of the cash. I wouldn't change her grades directly, so tutoring is the only way to help. I can't show favoritism to my students, and I doubt anyone else could help her improve as quickly as you can. Please don't mention the gambling debt to Miss Taylor. I want her to know she earned her grades through her own hard work. Thank you for considering this. Your friend, George. Tyson sighed again, feeling tightness in his chest. He didn't really want to do this, but he couldn't say no to George. Of all his friends, only George kept coming around, even if Tyson wasn't the best host. That role belonged to Amani. He folded the letter and put it back in the envelope, stalling as he thought of something to say to Christy. "Will you help me?" she asked. He looked into her eyes and felt himself getting ready to agree. Did anyone ever say no to this woman? He masked his feelings. I haven't even had breakfast yet. Come on. Can you tell me why you think my time is important? He walked over to the patio doors that led into his living room. When he invited the blonde woman to sit down, he noticed her looking around with a smile. This made him glance around too, but all he saw were reminders of people who were no longer there. His mood sank. He moved to a small wood stove that warmed the room, opened the door, and tossed in George's letter. As he closed it, the letter caught fire and quickly turned to ash. He turned back to his guest. I need to shower and get dressed, then I will make breakfast. Have you eaten? He asked. She answered quickly, Yes, but I wouldn't mind some coffee if you're making it. He frowned and pointed to the machines in the kitchen. He had never learned to use them, but the last time George visited, he made coffee using special beans. It works, but I'm not sure how to use it. If you know how, feel free. Tyson walked away without checking if she needed anything else. He closed his bedroom door and went into the bathroom to put his robe in the laundry basket. After a quick shower and shave, he dressed in tan shorts and a black t-shirt. He rubbed some unscented cream on his aching left knee. Taking a deep breath, he opened his door and headed back to the living room. He saw Miss Taylor standing in the kitchen by the coffee machine. It was making its usual sounds, so he guessed she knew what she was doing. She turned and smiled at him, and he felt a strange sense of familiarity. This machine is great, much better than the one my parents have, she exclaimed. The feeling of recognition faded as her excitement grew. I prefer plain black coffee, but Amani really liked her espresso, he replied, without much enthusiasm. She smiled kindly at him, and he quickly moved to the fridge to gather breakfast items. He took out 2 eggs, some yogurt, spinach, and a few small tomatoes. While he cooked the scrambled eggs, he glanced at her as she worked on the coffee. She was preparing 2 small cups. These are good beans, she remarked happily. He nodded slightly. George brought them. She nodded as she finished. The coffee was ready. When I got here, I didn't see a car in the driveway. I thought maybe you went into town, she said. I don't drive, he replied directly. She looked at him carefully. Because of... Yes, he interrupted. She paused at his quick response. She slid 1 mug toward him, and he nodded in thanks. How do you get groceries? She asked. He glanced at her with a tired expression. They deliver. He took a sip of the espresso. It was strong, but good. He smiled at her eager expression, and she responded with a bright smile. That feeling of familiarity returned, but he still couldn't figure out the reason behind it. You have a lovely home. Is that door for another bedroom? She asked, pointing to a door next to his bedroom door. Most of the things inside that room used to belong to Amani. Yes, but it's just a storage space and where I have my home gym. Tyson finished cooking his breakfast and took it to the small table by the patio doors to enjoy the view of the lake while eating. Miss Taylor seemed to think this was an invitation to sit between him and the doors, blocking his view. She smiled at him, which only made him feel more uneasy. He didn't like the pressure. Did George tell you I won't teach anyone who isn't serious? He said, regretting it as soon as he spoke. Yes, Professor Haley made it clear that I need to show I deserve your time, she replied calmly. And? Miss Taylor then shared her reasons while Tyson listened, quietly finishing his meal. He nodded as she spoke, feeling impressed by what she said, and each time he did, she seemed to sit up a little straighter, her smile growing. When she reached the end and mentioned that her grades were dropping, he recalled George's comments about the mystery. He agreed it was puzzling. This woman had many advantages, yet she wasn't making an effort to fix her situation. Why? He asked directly. Her smile faltered as she thought she had explained herself. No, why is your grade dropping? He clarified. He could see she was struggling to answer, and after a moment she replied, My other classes are much easier. I feel like I already understand everything, and I don't have to try hard in those. I need to put in more effort in this class. And you haven't tried harder because... Her gaze met his, and her smile faded. He recognized that look of sadness all too well. Think about what you have, he said, and her expression changed. Anger sparked in her eyes. I know I'm lucky to have been born into wealth and privilege, she began, her frustration evident. Tyson shook his head. No, it's a way to reflect. Count the things you appreciate. She blinked at him. Is this a test of my mindset? She asked, beginning to understand his approach. He gave her a serious look. If I'm going to help you, I need to know if your struggle is just about the material or if there's something deeper. Each situation needs a different way to handle it. He felt like telling her that he couldn't take on someone else's problems, but he held back. She looked at him with big eyes and returned to thinking about her benefits, as he called them. Can't be real, just ideas, he said, and she gave him an annoyed stare. She cleared her throat gently. I'm thankful for my family. I'm thankful for my friends. I'm thankful for my fiancé. I'm thankful for being able to go to this university. I'm thankful for... Stop! You named the biggest parts of your happiness. People. Which one isn't true? She made an upset noise, but he continued. Your parents. Is your dad pushing you to do something with your life? Is your mom too critical of your choices? He probed. No! They have been nothing but supportive, she replied sharply, but he noticed a hint of doubt in her expression. So they support something you don't agree with. Let's move on, he said, and her anger grew. He didn't care. He had nothing to lose. He understood George's decision to keep her score as it was. Tyson was also standing by his principles as a teacher, although he didn't wish to return to that role. Your friends. Do you have anyone in your group who isn't truly a friend? Someone you can't trust? Someone who might be against you? He asked. Again, no. I don't let negative people close to me, she shot back. He nodded. Then it must be your fiancé. Does he lack in some way? Is he too pushy? Not pushy enough? Does he mistreat you? He would never, she gasped, her eyes wide as she looked at him in shock. But he doesn't make you feel excited? Tyson guessed as he sensed a pause. Miss Taylor stood and walked around the table. He saw her hand lift, expecting a slap, but he was ready to take it. He had felt worse pain. Christy rushed out of the house and flung herself into the driver's seat of her car before the tears came. She wasn't even sure why she was crying. She told herself it was because of his rude behavior, but she couldn't fully accept that. He was right, and she couldn't handle it. She let herself feel the stress and slowly pushed back her tears until they stopped. She couldn't give up, or she would fail the class. She didn't want to show the man inside that he was right about her worth. She was completely worthy. Christy got out of the car and grabbed the bag with her books and notes for the math course from the back seat. She took a deep breath and turned back toward the charming house. Be brave or go home. She marched back to the front door and rang the bell. Moments later, the man looked at her with a curious expression as he peered through the screen door. I'm sorry for hitting you. His face remained the same as he replied, No, you're not. You had a reason. I was rude. She paused for a moment. Can I come back in? He sighed and stepped aside, motioning for her to enter. She walked back to the table and placed her bag of books down. He glanced at it with a frown. I haven't agreed to help you yet. You've noticed the problem that's affecting my grades. Only part of the problem has been addressed. Recognizing it is a good start, but you need a clear plan to fix it, or it will keep holding you back, he suggested. I'm calling off the wedding, she said, surprised by how good it felt to say it. She felt lighter. Tyson raised his eyebrows in surprise. That seems a bit much for a small issue. You could just go for counseling for that. She frowned and shook her head. It's not just that. She thought for a moment, and with the decision made, the other truths she had been avoiding came to light. I think we're too similar. Our lives are the same, and so are our likes and dislikes. Without any differences, there's no excitement. It would be easy to be married to Blake, but I think I'd end up feeling bored. I'm sure he would too. When he proposed, I got caught up in the idea of marriage, but that's not enough. It wouldn't be fair to either of us. She looked at the ring on her hand and, with a sigh, took it off and put it in her purse. "Can we start now?" she asked, and he couldn't hide a small chuckle at her determination. "Did I say I've agreed to help you yet?" he replied. Her blue eyes met his brown eyes. "You've pointed out the issue, and I've shared my plan to fix it. I won't let this stop my career. What else do you need?" Christy insisted. He nodded to himself, seeing she was serious, and he felt his last doubt fade away. "All right. Take me to the part you feel most comfortable with," Tyson said as he moved to sit next to her at the small table. She smiled, took out her books, and turned to her notes. They spent the rest of the morning reviewing. He took her back 2 chapters before he was satisfied she understood the material. "You started missing details here," he pointed out, and she recalled when they began that chapter. It was a couple of weeks into their engagement. How had he known? She looked at Tyson, who was watching her with curiosity. With a shy smile, she turned back to the textbook. He guided her through the chapters, explaining the formulas and giving examples. Christy took notes and felt like she was really starting to understand. When they reached a tricky problem, she raised her hand to pause. She remembered how frustrated she had been with this part before, but now it all made sense. "Why can't they teach this the way you just did? Your way is so much clearer," she said. He shrugged. "Different teachers have different styles, but math is still math. Numbers have their own special language." He glanced at the clock on the wall. "Are you hungry?" She nodded with a smile. "I was going to make a salad with grilled chicken. Does that sound good?" Tyson asked, and her smile grew as she agreed. "Why don't you work on those 3 practice questions while I prepare lunch?" he suggested, pointing to the textbook. "Yes, I will," she replied with a grin. As Tyson headed to the kitchen, she found herself looking his way for just a moment. Shaking her head, she focused on her notebook and started tackling the equations. She breezed through the first 2, but struggled to concentrate on the third, her mind wandering. It was hard to believe he was 58. He looked great, especially when he had just come out of the lake. "What's confusing you about the third question?" he asked, suddenly making her jump. "Sorry, what?" she managed to say, surprised. He frowned a little. "I asked what you're finding difficult about the third one." "Oh, it's nothing. Just got a bit distracted," she replied, hoping to shift the focus back. He looked at her with a raised eyebrow before setting their lunch on the table. Christy focused on finishing the last question. When she finished, she handed her work to him, and he quickly checked it over, confirming that she understood the material well. "Looks like you have this down. After lunch, we can tackle the next 4 chapters. There might have just been a small mix-up in understanding," he said. "No, I really think your way of explaining makes a big difference," she insisted. He shook his head. "I'm not a teacher anymore." She replied, "That's really too bad." "If you want my help this afternoon, just leave it at that," he said. She raised her hands in surrender. They dug into their lunches, and Christy was pleased. The salad was fresh, and the warm, slightly spicy chicken paired perfectly with the dressing. "It's like spicy chicken wings with a cool dressing," she exclaimed. He smiled and nodded. "It's a secret recipe." After a moment of quiet, Christy felt she had to ask him something. "If you don't drive, do you go outside for more than your morning swim?" He looked at her carefully before answering. "I walk every day. I'll do it today once we finish the 4th chapter." "Where do you walk?" she asked. "I walk along the lakefront road and back. It's 6 miles. "I have my gym clothes in my car. Can I join you today?" she asked confidently. He met her gaze, and all he saw was hope. He seemed unsure for a moment, but finally said, "Okay." She looked around the room and tried to count all the pictures of Tyson and his wife, but she lost track. "You sure have a lot of photos. I can't believe how much you've changed." He glanced around too and shrugged. "Like I said before, the man in those pictures isn't here anymore. Everything he cared about is gone. I'm not Professor Kane anymore. I'm just Tyson Kane now." "Is math important?" Tyson paused, then noticed her blue eyes challenging him to take his words back. "Let's finish the tutoring," he said firmly. They spent the next 3 hours going through 4 chapters in the textbook. Christy took good notes on his explanations and asked many questions. He stayed calm and patient the whole time. She seemed to relax more as the lessons went on, and when they finished the last chapter, she closed her notebook with a happy sigh. "I feel great. We even went 1 chapter beyond what's being taught at the university, and I understand the methods and formulae now. I'm going to do well on the next test. Thank you so much." He nodded but looked away from her smile, appearing troubled. "Are you ready for your walk?" Christy asked. He stood up and stretched. "Yes, I just need to get changed." "Let me put my books away and grab my gym clothes," she said, jumping from her chair. She quickly packed her books into her bag and hurried outside. She switched bags in the car and brought her duffel bag back inside. "You can use the guest bathroom to change," he said, and she went inside. Once the door closed, she couldn't help but smile. He wouldn't see what was coming. Tyson watched the bathroom door close, wondering how he ended up in this situation. It was really George's fault for sending her his way. She was attractive, and her nice outfit showed that she took care of herself. He frowned at himself, realizing she was young enough to be his daughter, and close to being his granddaughter. He pushed those thoughts away and went to his bedroom to put on his running clothes. He knew he wouldn't be doing any running today because of his knee. He put on a pair of ankle socks, then returned to the living room, locked the patio doors, and grabbed his keys. He sat on the bench by the front door and put on his running shoes. Suddenly, he heard a noise and looked up. His mouth opened in surprise as she walked toward him. He noticed her bright shoes and how they looked nice against her bare ankles. Her yoga pants fit snugly, showing off her shape. They were decorated with colorful feathers from just above her ankle to just below her knee. The design changed to a pattern of orange, gold, and brown as it went up her legs. He noticed her flat stomach and the matching sports bra, which fitted her well. She smiled at him, her blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail. That's a nice outfit. Do you like it? This is the first time I'm wearing it," she said, smoothing the fabric. Tyson felt a strange rush of feelings, surprised that he could feel this way about someone younger. "Yes, it looks good. We should go," he replied, trying hard to focus on something else. She walked out the door with a pleased smile, and he couldn't help but glance at her as she passed. He held his breath, impressed by how she looked. He locked the door and noticed her looking at him. She turned a bit red when she realized he caught her staring. Then her eyes got wide when she noticed he was a little flustered. Tyson tried to stay calm as they walked down the driveway and turned left onto the road. Christy walked beside him. He saw her cheerful smile and wondered. "I'm sure this isn't as good a workout as you'd get at the gym, and you'd have younger people there who might appreciate your outfit better." She bit her lip to hide her smile at his mistake and shook her head as they walked quickly. "The gym gets boring after a while. Being outside feels nice," she said, smiling widely. "Besides, you're in better shape than anyone I know at the gym." He raised his eyebrows, surprised, and she nodded, confirming what she said. "You're really fit." "For someone who's almost 60, you mean," he joked. She held up her hands. "No, you just look great. I don't see you as old at all." They walked in silence as he thought about what she said. He felt flattered, but deep down, he knew she was just beginning her life while he had already lived a long one. They reached the end of the road where it used to lead into town along a country path. They walked by the old spot where the train tracks used to cross. As he always did, Tyson stopped to think about the strange events of that night. It felt like a loss of chance, but the facts showed that it really happened. "Is this the place?" Christy asked softly, and he glanced at her. He turned away from the crossing and walked east along the road, and she followed. "Yes, they found me in that ditch." He pointed to a spot nearby where his body had been found after the crash. They paused again at a large stone with Imani's name carved into it. She wasn't laid to rest here, but the town wanted to remember her, so this stone was put here. He continued walking. He picked up his pace to a light jog to distance himself from the reminders of the accident, and the ache in his knee was manageable. Christy jogged up next to him, and he felt her watching him. He looked over, and she offered him a warm smile. "Please don't." There was a moment of silence. "Sorry." They kept jogging until he had to slow down because his knee was telling him it was time to take it easy. "What's wrong with your knee?" she asked. "It needs to be fixed," he replied. "I hear that's a pretty routine procedure now," she said kindly. He nodded but didn't say more. It wasn't really about the surgery. It was the thought of the trip to the hospital that made him uneasy. The counselor he met there said he could move past that with help, but he hadn't returned since he left. It felt like his life was on pause. "I could give you a ride if you want." "No, sorry, I don't. Drive or get in cars," he quickly replied. She fell silent again, and he tried not to look at her, but he finally had to turn and see her expression. It wasn't disappointment. It was pity, and that felt worse. "Don't! I don't need your pity," he said sharply, but his voice wavered, undermining his strong words. He fell quiet. They walked along the tree-lined street, enjoying the peacefulness of nature. "I guess if you had to choose a place, you picked a nice one. It's beautiful here," Christy said calmly. He shot her a look of disbelief, but she just held his gaze, daring him to disagree. He opened his mouth, but no words came. He tried to jog away from her, but after a couple of steps, he was back to walking. His knee wasn't going to cooperate with him. She stayed next to him as they approached the eastern end of the lakefront road, where they turned back on the side facing the water. Christy looked at the houses along the way with curiosity. "How much would it cost to buy one of these houses?" she finally asked. He laughed a little. "You wouldn't find anyone willing to sell even if they could," he replied, noticing her expression. He explained further. "The property tax is nothing because GRT owns the land. We can't change the size of the homes or build more stories. We also can't pave the driveways. The homes are rented, so we can't sell them, but we can transfer our rental agreement to a family member. The original owners of GRT valued family and believed in keeping land for their loved ones. So, even with these rules, we have a pretty good deal. However, there is a lot of money tied up in this land. The lease will end in about 60 years, and then two things might happen. GRT could ask everyone to leave and sell the land for a lot of money, possibly putting large houses where these smaller ones now stand." "What's the other option?" she asked. "I've heard that GRT might ignore the town council completely and offer another long lease to the current renters with the same rules." He noticed the surprised look on the blonde's face. Things had been calmer between the town council and GRT until an accident happened, leading to a lawsuit. The council wanted GRT to give up the land near the lake and the woods. Instead, they got a new road so the town could build a new neighborhood with their developer friends. That created a lot of bad feelings between the council and GRT. "So those houses I saw on the way in are mostly owned by town council members," he said with a serious look. They walked on as Christy seemed deep in thought. "Blake's mom is on the town council and his dad is a real estate developer," she finally said. He noticed the worried look in her eyes and shrugged. It was better to know now than later. When they got back to his place, Tyson's knee started hurting a lot. He probably shouldn't have gone jogging. He saw his neighbor, Mrs. Willoughby, working on her flower bushes. He remembered she liked being called by her first name. "Good afternoon, Barbara." She looked up and, seeing Christy with him, smiled even bigger. "Good afternoon, Tyson. It's wonderful to see you out with such lovely company." He sighed as Barbara began to fuss over him. "This is Christy Taylor. She's studying at the university and George asked me to help her with math. Christy, this is Barbara Willoughby, my neighbor." Christy shook hands with Barbara and they both smiled. "It's so great to hear you're teaching again," Barbara said excitedly. "He's a fantastic teacher. He helped me understand the parts I was struggling with and now I'm confident about passing my finals," Christy said with equal excitement. Tyson gave both women a frustrated look as they beamed at him with admiration. "I'm not going back to teaching. This is just a one-time thing." "All as a favor for George?" Barbara looked at him with a hint of disappointment. "That would be a pity. You have such a rare talent. It shouldn't go to waste." "Well, that's my decision, isn't it?" he replied firmly. The women exchanged glances, and Tyson took that as his cue. "Have a good evening, Barbara," he said, turning to walk up the driveway. Behind him, he heard Christy murmuring her goodbyes before catching up with him. As he opened the front door, he noticed Barbara still watching from outside. He waved politely, then stepped inside, closing the door and locking it behind them. Christy sighed contentedly, and he turned to see her looking relaxed and happy. For a moment he paused, slightly caught off guard by the sudden closeness. "What are you doing?" he asked, more surprised than anything. Christy smiled, simply enjoying the moment. "Just unwinding. I don't often get to just let go." "Well, make yourself comfortable," he offered, sensing her contentment. She moved a little closer, and he felt his mind drift to their shared laughter from earlier. It had been a while since he'd shared an easy moment like that with someone. But as they stood there, he quickly regained his composure and took a step back, clearing his throat. Christy looked at him, a mix of excitement and curiosity in her gaze. "Well, I guess I'll leave it there. Thanks, Tyson." He blinked, unsure of what to say, but nodded. For a moment he considered what she was hinting at, but he knew what mattered most, keeping things straightforward, with her. After their shared closeness, Tyson found himself wanting to return her affection in kind. He looked at her, admiring her presence, feeling a warmth grow between them. Without a second thought, he took her hand, leading her across the living room and into his bedroom. They stood close by the bed, and he kissed her deeply, savoring the moment. She sighed softly, leaning into his touch as his hands held her. The quiet connection between them grew stronger, filling the room with a sense of calm. He knelt down beside her, taking in the softness of her presence. She looked down at him, a bit shy, and he reassured her with a gentle smile. "You're beautiful," he whispered, and he felt her relax. She pulled him close, and he shared in her warmth, both of them enjoying the simple closeness they had created. He helped her onto the bed, and they settled into a gentle embrace. His touch was careful and thoughtful, noticing what made her laugh or sigh happily. They stayed like that, wrapped in each other's arms, lost in a quiet, shared moment that brought them both comfort and joy. She held on to him, a look of contentment on her face. Time seemed to slip away as they stayed close, finding comfort in each other's company and savoring the peacefulness of simply being together. Tyson felt his heart lighten, enjoying the feeling of connection that had grown between them, grateful for a moment that felt as simple as it was genuine. Her hand rested on his as they shared a moment together, and she held on to it as she appeared to enjoy her feelings. Eventually, she gently pushed him away, and he withdrew his hand. He looked at his fingers for a moment, reflecting on what had just happened, while she relaxed on the mattress, closing her eyes as she caught her breath. He stood up and watched her rest. A small voice in his mind questioned his choices. Reality hit him hard, and he almost stumbled at the thought. He realized that he shouldn't be acting this way, especially with someone so young. He had never been known for being flirtatious. Yet here he was, reflecting on a very intense moment with a lovely young woman he had only just met, who seemed to share in the same feelings. Why had he suddenly changed his usual behavior? Yes, she was beautiful and smart, but they were from different generations. They didn't have much in common. Even though he had been alone for over 5 years after losing his wife, he still wore his wedding ring. He didn't feel obligated to be loyal anymore since she was gone, but he still felt a hint of guilt, as if he had crossed an invisible line. "What's wrong?" she asked, leaning back on her elbows. I don't know why this happened," he replied, feeling uneasy. "You're thinking too hard about a fun moment between two people," she responded, noticing his conflicted look. "I think you're very attractive, and I find your mind fascinating. You think I'm attractive, right?" She raised an eyebrow playfully. "Definitely, and I find you mentally fascinating too," he admitted, feeling a bit awkward. She smiled and nodded. "That's all there is to it. Just a fun moment, but a great one. No strings attached, though I'm curious about what else you could do," she said, hinting at his reaction. Still trying to make sense of everything, he nodded and headed toward the bathroom. As he turned on the shower, he flinched slightly when he felt her touch on his back. He turned and found her smiling at him. He opened his mouth to voice his concerns, but she kissed him softly. His heart raced. Her kiss was captivating, and before he knew it, he was kissing her back deeply, feeling a strong connection. He was lost in the moment, letting go of his worries. Tyson craved that connection with her, now. He reached back and turned off the shower, then wrapped his arms around her and lifted her gently. She held onto his shoulders as he carried her out of the bathroom, setting her carefully on a towel on the counter. They shared a warm, close moment, both feeling the calm after their laughter and shared vulnerability. "Are we ready for this?" he asked, looking at her intently. She nodded, a sense of trust and excitement in her expression. They both felt caught up in each other, lost in the moment as he held her close. Christy found herself admiring the feeling of connection, her heart racing from the strength of his embrace and the quiet focus they both shared. She leaned back slightly, catching a glimpse of their reflections in the mirror, and smiled, marveling at the closeness they had found. Tyson gently held her, his movements soft but sure, and they both felt the room slip away. For a time they were simply together, grounded in the moment they had made. They felt a warm, steady rhythm of closeness that left them both feeling safe and cherished. She held his hand, sharing a look of joy and comfort, and it filled her with a feeling she hadn't expected. After a while they sat quietly together, breathing in the calm of the room. Tyson's expression softened, and Christy felt an overwhelming sense of peace wash over her, as if something new had settled between them, something that made them both feel deeply connected. As they both rested in that quiet understanding, she felt a mix of wonder and security, realizing that this unexpected closeness brought her a sense of confidence and belonging she hadn't felt in a long time. Her mind and feelings were so confused that all she could do was hold him close, pulling his face down to hers to softly kiss his lips. But the kisses felt like promises she wasn't sure she should make, so she rested her forehead against his. Tyson sensed the last bits of joy slowly fading as he breathed heavily above her. His body buzzed with energy from the workout, and he felt better than he had in a long time. He gently pulled back, and Christy let go of his head. He lowered her arms to rest on her chest, where his gaze lingered for a moment. He was still pressing against her lightly, so he carefully eased away. Christy gasped as he moved back and seemed a bit dazed. He hoped he hadn't hurt her. He decided to pick her up, and she sighed, resting her head on his shoulder. Tyson carried her to the bedroom. His mind raced with a familiar thought. He laid her down on the bed, her hair fanned out on the pillow, and she reached up to bring him close for a kiss. The kiss was warm and gentle. As he pulled back, he noticed his muscles were starting to tremble. Her blue eyes looked up at him with a question, and he felt wide-eyed. Ashley. So young when they started college together, just as beautiful. Why hadn't he noticed it before? "Are you okay?" she asked softly. He couldn't find the words, so he simply nodded, needing to breathe. Tyson stood by the lake, the cool breeze on his skin making him shiver. He wasn't sure how he got there. "She really is lovely." That voice again. He looked up as dusk began to settle, realizing she was early. Turning to his right, Imani stood close by, just a reach away. He wanted to reach out, but held back. The breeze blew her hair from her face, and she looked at him with sad eyes. "The lake doesn't want you." He stepped back, feeling her words hit him hard. "The woman inside does." He shook his head, confused, and glanced through the glass patio doors. Inside, curled up in his comforter, was Christy. "What do—" He looked back at Imani, but she was gone. The fact he had tried to speak to her unsettled him. He shivered again, turning away from the dark waters. His legs moved him across the yard toward the house, and he opened the door to go inside. Worried blue eyes met his brown ones. He felt a weight to share his feelings and finally gave in. "She said the lake doesn't want me." Gentle hands touched his chest, feeling the cold on his skin. Christy opened the blanket and pulled him into her warm embrace. They stood close. "Who said that?" Christy asked. He looked into her eyes and saw only kindness. He hesitated but felt that everything would be okay. "Imani." She smiled softly while watching him. "Smart lady. Can you tell me about her?" she asked, guiding him to the couch near the small stove. He added a log to the fire and then settled next to Christy under the quilt. He felt lighter and more at peace, ready to share. And Christy listened. Tyson Kane felt like a new man. Okay, maybe that was an exaggeration. He felt like a man with a new knee, finally working without constant pain. Without reminders of his surgery, he felt renewed. It also helped that he had a lovely companion now who visited him a few times each week. Christy Taylor was busy with her classes and a new part-time job. When she could, she came to see him at his cottage by the lake. Since the day she surprised him in his backyard last year, she had become much more than a stranger. They built a strong bond. For someone so young, she was full of energy. She encouraged him to talk about things he had kept inside, even about sometimes seeing his late wife at night. Since he first shared this, his visits from Imani had become less frequent, but they didn't completely stop. Christy reassured him that talking about it was good. She suggested he might have some unresolved feelings about his wife. Their farewell had been so sudden and during an argument, and this view made sense to him. Had she mentioned anything mystical, he would have dismissed it. Tyson chuckled at himself. He would refuse to let a beautiful woman who brought joy into his life walk away so easily. He found new enjoyment in their moments together, but it was curious how she often preferred to be playful in the bathroom. Feeling a blush, he quickly shifted his thoughts to simpler things. He walked down his driveway along the lakefront, stopping at the water's edge. Honestly, he had grown to cherish Christy's visits. He realized he had become a recluse in the 5 years after his accident. A 59-year-old man didn't have much in common with a 22-year-old woman, but they found comfort in sharing their thoughts on current events, even if they often disagreed. He was learning to really listen to her words, and she was figuring out how to do the same for him. They talked about their daily lives. She shared her stories while he mostly followed the same routine every day. Last year, Christy had started making small improvements to his home that he could accept. After about a month, he noticed that she had put pictures she took of them in some of the frames around his house. The old photos showed him and Imani, or just Imani. Christy didn't replace all of them. Some pictures of Imani still hung in their places, but Christy had also added smiling photos of herself and put them in more visible spots. She also persuaded him to agree to a big change: knee surgery. She took him to the hospital, and after a few days, he returned home, still a bit groggy. Christy teamed up with his neighbor, Barbara Willoughby, to check on him during the first weeks after his surgery. Later, he found pictures of Barbara in several frames. He wasn't sure who had switched them. The recovery for his knee took time, but pain was something he was used to, so he kept going until he could walk 6 miles each day with little discomfort. He asked his doctor when he could jog again. The doctor advised him to sit still and tested his knee. Jogging was not recommended yet, so he would stick to walking for now, but he wanted to do more. This morning the waves looked calm. He had gone for a swim in the lake earlier, still keeping up with his routine of swimming out and back. However, he learned to head back before feeling too tired. Imani used to say the lake didn't want him, which had worried him, so he stopped pushing himself too hard in the cold water. Now, he returned to the shore just as he began to feel tired. He decided to step away from the lake's tempting waters. Sighing, he turned his back on the beautiful blue and went inside for a shower and breakfast. After that, he would do a new thing that Christy had suggested, checking in with his math friends on an online discussion board. It took him a couple of weeks to get past the surprised messages about him being alive and the condolences for the loss of his wife before people would talk about math again. Now, he had a few regular friends he stayed in touch with. It wasn't the kind of conversation everyone else dreamed of, but he found it enjoyable. He had come up with some good ideas that he was thinking about. He smiled as he walked inside. He had his usual morning routine to stick to. Christy Taylor was having one of those moments when everything seemed clear. She was sitting in her car in the coffee shop parking lot, letting her thoughts flow. She had learned to give herself time to consider new ideas and perspectives. This was another lesson from Tyson. This morning she felt thankful for many things, but not for objects. Tyson had taught her that feelings shouldn't be tied to things. It made emotions feel less genuine. He never pushed his beliefs on her. They were just how he chose to live, and these ideas made sense to her, too. She wasn't looking forward to telling Tyson that she would be leaving town and wouldn't see him for a while. A great opportunity awaited her in New York City, where she would finish her studies and start her career at a top fashion retailer. It was a big step forward. She knew Tyson would be happy for her and supportive, but he would also hide his sadness about her departure. Christy worried about him. He wasn't ready to be alone. His fears still held him back. He couldn't ride in a car and hadn't even been able to sit in hers for more than a few minutes. She sighed, realizing she needed to find a new friend for him. This way, she could leave with peace of mind. Tyson could manage with Barbara for short visits, but he thought she was too controlling, and he was right. Barbara's strong maternal instincts might be why her own children visited her so little. Christy went through her list of friends, hoping to think of one who could spend time with Tyson and help him feel better. Unfortunately, most of her friends had steady boyfriends who weren't comfortable with their partners spending time with someone like Tyson. She felt uneasy thinking about her last date night. It would be hard to find someone new who could connect with her like he did. Shaking her head, she focused on her friends again. There was Rachel, who had just broken up with Chris after a brief reunion. That girl was a handful, and Tyson didn't need that kind of drama. Neither did Chris. But if he took her back, they were a perfect match. Then she thought of Jillian. She wasn't dating anyone at the moment. Christy recalled their talks about her last relationship and remembered Jillian had some complicated family issues. Maybe dating someone older could be risky. Jillian thought it would be fun, but she knew Tyson would not appreciate if she started calling him that during an intimate moment. So Jillian decided against it. Miranda was dating Vince, which was new, and Christy felt uneasy about him. Vince was friends with Blake, and after realizing the truth about Tyson, she now thought her ex-fiance was quite spoiled. She wasn't sure Vince would be much better. Christy believed Miranda could actually be a good match for Tyson. Miranda's outgoing personality and positive attitude might help him open up. Some of Christy's other friends found Miranda a bit annoying and impulsive. But really, she just had a little social awkwardness. Tyson's patient nature could handle that. He might even help her feel more confident. Miranda was a second-generation American with Mexican roots, a bit shorter than Christy, with beautiful caramel skin, warm brown eyes, and long brown hair. Miranda often complained about her body, especially her rounder shape compared to her friends. She was fit from her love of road cycling. She joked that Christy had received both their shares of good looks, especially when they talked about body image, which sometimes made Christy's other friends uneasy. Christy found it amusing, though. Just what Tyson needed. She started her car and drove back toward her neighborhood, but took a turn onto a side street just before her own. Miranda lived with her parents in a lovely home not far from Christy's family. Miranda was the oldest child, with an 18-year-old brother, Raul Jr., and a 16-year-old sister, Natalie. Christy wished she had siblings like them, but hadn't shared this with her own parents. Miranda's dad was a successful stockbroker, and her mom owned a staging business. Christy heard that Raul Jr. just got a new truck for his birthday and was excited to invite Christy for a ride, which made Miranda laugh at Christy's surprised reaction. It seemed he thought of himself as quite the charmer. She parked and walked to the front door to ring the bell. Moments later, Raul Jr. greeted her with a cheerful smile. "Good morning, Christy. You look great today," he said as nicely as an 18-year-old could. She smiled back knowingly and raised an eyebrow. "Good morning, Raul. Maybe save that charm for your friends." "Christy, ignore him and come back to the kitchen," Miranda called out from the other room. Raul appeared to be mesmerized by Christy's blue eyes and bright smile as he thought about her words. She could almost see him wondering if she thought he was attractive enough to have more than one girlfriend. She walked around the fit young man. He clearly worked out often. Perhaps that's where he picked up some of his negative behavior. As she entered the kitchen, she could feel his gaze on her the whole way. "Junior, stop looking at my friends behind. Quit acting so foolish," Miranda snapped, causing Christy to turn her attention to her worried friend. "I'm not, and quit calling me Junior," he retorted. When Christy glanced at him, he tried to regain his cool demeanor. Besides, women like it when a guy shows they appreciate their appearance. Christy winced and shook her head to indicate he was mistaken, which made him look embarrassed. "I have a friend who knows how to treat a woman right and make her feel valued," she suggested. Raul's smile came back. "Is this the mystery guy you keep to yourself? The perfect one?" Miranda asked, a bit more sharply than she meant. Christy immediately felt concern for her friend. She looked at Raul. "Could we have a moment alone?" she asked softly, and he nodded, sensing his sister's distress. Miranda stood, took Christy's hand, and looked at her brother. "Never mind. We'll go to my room." Christy followed her upstairs into her cozy room. Miranda shut the door, and her warm brown eyes filled with tears. Christy opened her arms and Miranda leaned against her as the tears started to flow. "What happened?" Christy asked when the crying began to settle. Miranda's sadness turned to anger. "Vince is a horrible person." Christy wasn't surprised to hear that, but she kept her reaction to herself. "What did he do?" "Right after we were together, he broke up with me by text. Then he shared a picture of us with a mean caption." "What?" Christy gasped, feeling a surge of anger. "They eventually took the post down, but everyone had seen it by then. It was so humiliating," Miranda cried again. Christy felt a wave of frustration as she held her friend. If she could get a screenshot of the post before it was removed, she knew exactly who to ask for help. She was determined to make sure the dean knew about this and took action. Getting Vince kicked out of the university for what he did would be a great start. She was going to make it happen. After a moment, Miranda regained her composure and pulled back, determination in her lovely gaze. "That's it. No more dating until I graduate. There are no good guys at this university." Christy offered her a reassuring smile. "Does that mean you might be able to check in on a friend of mine now and then?" Miranda wiped her eyes with a tissue and looked at Christy, puzzled. "A friend?" "Tyson Kane." Miranda's confusion deepened. "Wait, I remember that name." Christy sighed. "The train incident." "Yes, that's right. He stopped the train. Oh, his wife died and he was hurt. You've been helping him recover," Miranda exclaimed. A brief image flashed in her mind, making her cheeks warm. "Well, not exactly. He was mostly better when I went to him for math tutoring." She shook her head to refocus. "He lost his wife in the accident. He barely made it through that day himself and has had a hard time since then. I've been trying to encourage him to come into town, but he can't handle being in a car yet. He needed a lot of calming medicine just to come for his knee surgery." Miranda stared at her, surprised. This was a side of her friend she hadn't noticed before. A big smile spread across her face. "What?" Christy asked carefully. "You keep surprising me, Miss Taylor," she giggled. Christy shook her head, looking confused. "Your kindness is so inspiring." "Whoa, don't go calling me a saint. I went to him to get help with my math. He's an amazing teacher. In just one day, he helped me understand everything I was struggling with. Of course I was thankful. I wanted to help him too. He's really a great man." Miranda just smiled and nodded, looking pleased. Christy cleared her throat, looking hopeful. "You know I'm leaving soon. I would feel so much better knowing someone was visiting him a few times each week." "Get him moving? Walking around?" Miranda suggested. Christy nodded. "He swims in the lake in the morning and takes long walks afterward. He also exercises at home." Miranda looked impressed. "So he knows how important it is to stay active." Christy smiled. "Oh, yes. Sure, I can help with that. Where does he live?" Miranda asked, and Christy hugged her tightly with excitement. "Give me your phone and I'll add his info," Christy said. Miranda handed over her phone as Christy entered the details. "He lives on Lakefront Road? Lucky guy. How did he end up with that house?" Miranda grinned. Christy gave her a tired look. "The homes there are passed down through families, so he inherited it from his parents when they passed away." She finished adding Tyson's info to Miranda's phone. Miranda looked a bit embarrassed for her earlier question. Just then, Christy's phone pinged with a text. "Oh, it's my mom. I was supposed to meet her and my aunt at the club. I have to go." She quickly replied, letting them know she was almost there. Then she took Miranda's arms and looked into her eyes. "I'm really sorry about Vince. He made a mistake, and there will be consequences for him. I also want to thank you for checking on Tyson. You won't regret it. He's great." She jumped up and hurried downstairs, needing to get across town in 5 minutes. That was easy when you drove fast. Miranda watched her friend rush away in surprise. She wondered what exciting things were happening in her life. She wasn't jealous of her friend. Well, not too much. She checked the address on her phone and decided to ride her bicycle on the new path to visit him tomorrow. Miranda had heard the story about 2 students who caused trouble in town and how they ended up in a serious accident at a train crossing, which affected Tyson Kane's family. Curious, she took her tablet and looked up the story. She followed some links and eventually read about Tyson himself. "Wow, he looks strong," she said to herself when she saw a photo of the big professor at a university event. He had his arm around a tall woman, which made him look even bigger. The woman was very attractive, and her skin was similar to Miranda's. Tyson looked really happy. Losing someone like her must have been tough for him. If Christy thought he was a nice man, Miranda was excited to meet him. She smiled, imagining him as a big teddy bear. She could really use a warm hug after everything Vince had put her through. The lake water felt warmer than usual as Tyson swam smoothly. His stamina was getting better, and he noticed he was getting a bit farther across the lake each time before turning back. He was careful not to push himself too hard. He had very little body fat, so he needed to keep moving, or he might struggle. Looking up, he saw the clear blue sky, promising a lovely day. He decided it would be nice to soak up some sun later. As he turned back, he spotted Barbara's house with its rooftop deck and saw the sun shining off her binoculars. Caring as always, Barbara had kept an eye on him for years, remembering how he struggled to get back to shore before Christy encouraged him to keep going. No! Christy's presence made him realize he had reasons to keep fighting. Imani was gone. Despite any lingering memories, she no longer existed. It was Christy who pointed out that Barbara had quietly supported him all along. The young woman had told him how she had heard his neighbor's soft words of encouragement the first morning she saw him come out of the water. So, his neighbor could see into his backyard from her roof, binoculars in hand. He swam steadily through the water as he thought about that. He let out a quiet sigh. Tyson had no plans to change how he lived for anyone, not even his neighbor. He enjoyed swimming and sunbathing in his own way, and that was not going to change. He would just keep ignoring any chance of someone looking at him. As the water warmed, he realized he was nearing the shallow end of the lake. The swim was done, and Tyson felt great. He stood up in the water, which came to his thighs, and took a deep breath to fill his lungs. Tomorrow he would swim further. Turning around, he admired his cozy home and felt grateful for it. The morning sun felt nice, so he tilted his head back with his eyes closed, running his hands through his hair to dry it. He noticed how long his curls had grown, reminding him a bit of Imani. He stepped out of the water, walked onto his lawn, and stretched his arms high, bending slightly to each side. Suddenly, a loud gasp made him open his eyes. He saw a young woman staring at him, her hand over her mouth, wearing a bright outfit that hugged her figure. Before he could take it all in, she quickly turned and hurried away down the path beside his house. He thought he might need to put a lock on the gate or get a bigger sign that said private. Miranda pedaled her bike along the winding path, her thoughts racing. What had she just witnessed? After a moment, she stopped at a small rest area with benches and took a seat, grabbing her water bottle. Christy had never mentioned that Tyson had family living with him. Was it possible he had a cousin? She clearly remembered that he was supposed to be an only child, so the man she had just seen had to be him, and he had been completely uncovered. She had caught a glimpse of a family resemblance before her eyes focused on nothing else but what she had seen. The gasp she had let out surprised even her. She gently patted her cheeks to shake off her daze. It would take some time to forget that picture. Climbing back on her bicycle, she set off again. She needed to talk to Christy about her request, as it seemed things were a little more complicated than she thought. "Good morning, Tyson," Christy called out after finishing her breakfast. "Hey, Christy, how's it going today?" he replied cheerfully. Christy smiled at the warmth in his voice, but soon remembered why she called, and her smile faded a bit. "I was wondering if I could come by this afternoon." "Of course. You know I'll make time for you," he joked lightly, though she caught a hint of hope in his tone. It made her heart flutter. "Not today," she said softly. "That's all right. Hey, do you remember your first visit to my home?" he asked, changing the subject. The shift in conversation surprised her, but her smile returned. "How could I ever forget that?" He laughed at her excitement. "Well, this morning I had another young visitor in my backyard, and she screamed and ran off." Christy noticed a hint of worry in his voice. "What did she look like?" she asked, pretty sure she knew who it was. She was covering her face, but she had beautiful brown eyes and long brown hair in a braid. She wore something very snug and strange shoes. "Ah, that was my friend Miranda Moreno. She likes to ride her bike on the country roads for fun. I told her we were friends and that I visited you at the lake, but I didn't expect her to show up today." "You mentioned us to her?" Tyson asked, and she could feel the unasked question in the air. "Just that we were friends. I kept it simple," she said with a smile. Then I might have messed up her first impression, he sighed. Christy couldn't help but giggle. I wouldn't say you messed up. You didn't scream. Her giggles turned into laughter. True, but I was bold. I remembered I asked you to prove you were who you said you were. He laughed at the memory. Right. You're a tough one. I'll have a chat with her. It will be fine. She was probably just surprised, Christy promised him. So, should I get a lock for the gate or a bigger sign to keep it private? He asked. Is that what the sign says? I thought it pointed to something surprising, she said, and burst into laughter. He chuckled. Okay, Miss Smarty Pants. I'll see you this afternoon. Bye. Bye. Christy hung up and quickly went to her car. She needed to find Miranda. She could have walked, but she knew a few places Miranda might be if she wasn't home. When she rang the doorbell, Raoul Jr. answered with a bright smile. 2 days in a row. It's either a lot or too little with you, he joked. She smiled back, giving him credit for his smooth line. I'm looking for Miranda, she replied sweetly. He sighed dramatically. Someday I hope you'll come to visit me. She grinned and raised an eyebrow. Not today. Raoul stepped back and motioned for her to go upstairs. She's back from her ride. She's in her room. Christy smiled and climbed the stairs, aware that he was watching her. You staring just makes it less likely to happen. She heard him make a sound of frustration, and then she was at her friend's bedroom door. She knocked. Miranda? It's me, Christy. She heard a squeak and some noise as if something fell. Just a sec, Miranda called from behind the door. Christy waited, trying not to think about the strange buzzing noise coming from inside. The door opened and Miranda stepped into the hall, her face a bit red. How about we sit on the patio? It's a beautiful day outside, she said quickly. Christy could still hear something buzzing angrily inside. Are you sure you don't want to turn that off first? She asked carefully. Miranda's shoulders dropped and she sighed. Okay, can you help me move the bed? They went inside and moved the bed away from the wall so Miranda could retrieve the personal item that had fallen between the mattress and the wall. She turned it off and placed it in the drawer of her bedside table. After pushing the bed back, they sat facing each other. Miranda's face looked flushed. I heard you had an interesting visit at Tyson's this morning, Christy began. Miranda's eyes widened. You didn't tell me Tyson had family living with him, and they were nudists, she exclaimed. Oh, you saw him without clothes? Christy said, grinning widely. She found this amusing. Saw him? He walked out of the lake like some kind of angel. He's so handsome, Miranda sighed. Who is he? Tyson's younger cousin? Christy laughed happily, and Miranda couldn't help but smile at that sound. Miranda, that was Tyson. The lovely brunette's smile faded into confusion. No, Mr. Kane is almost 60. This man looked to be in his 40s or 30s. Tyson lives alone. The man you saw come out of the lake was him. He swims every day. She took a breath and reached for Miranda's hand. Listen, he struggled a lot after the accident. He worked hard to improve himself. He lost weight and got fit. He's still really focused on his fitness. Miranda stared at Christy, realizing something. It's him! He's your mystery guy, she gasped. Christy smiled gently. Guy isn't quite right. He's a good friend, but there's no romantic love between us. But you're intimate with him. Christy's smile grew as she nodded. Tyson is amazing. Miranda squealed with excitement as Christy confirmed her guess. Christy raised her hands to calm her friend. That's something just for us. Tyson wasn't looking for this. He was really closed off when we first met. He didn't want me around or to join him for walks. We wouldn't have been close if I hadn't pursued him so much. He had concerns about our age difference. It didn't bother me. He's just so attractive. Miranda thought about Christy's request for her to check in on Tyson. Were you hoping I might connect with Tyson too? Christy looked at her in surprise. No. Oh no. I just wanted someone to help keep Tyson from withdrawing. He needed someone to talk to, someone to connect with in person. Once you get to know him, if you want to start a close relationship, you'll need to discuss it with him. He is a great person, but if I hadn't encouraged it, it might never have happened. He is very polite, she said with a warm smile. Miranda thought about what she had learned. She realized it was too soon after Vince to look for another boyfriend. She could use some time away from dating, but having someone to talk to could be nice. Then, an idea came to her mind. "You mentioned he is really into working out, right?" she asked. Christy nodded, and with excitement, Miranda jumped off the bed and pulled her friend with her. They hurried downstairs to the backyard and headed toward the big garage at the end of the driveway. Once inside, Miranda led Christy up to the loft. There, they saw several old bicycles hanging from the ceiling. She turned to her friend, full of enthusiasm. "We can fix up one of these bikes for him, and he can ride with me," Miranda said excitedly. Christy liked the idea, but realized that none of the bikes would probably be strong enough for Tyson. He would likely bend them if he tried hard. However, getting him a new bike, one that fit him and was tough enough, was a brilliant plan. It would help him stay active and give him a chance to explore beyond his neighborhood. Plus, it would give Miranda a reason to spend time with him too. "Miranda, that is a great idea, but we need to think bigger. Can you take me to the best bike shop right now?" she asked, her voice full of excitement. Miranda felt the thrill and nodded quickly. "I know just the place to go." Tyson heard the sound of tires on the gravel of his driveway and smiled. Christy had arrived. When he heard another set of tires, he turned toward the door. Was there another car? He checked the oven to ensure everything was fine before going to open the door. In the furthest spot from the door, he saw Christy's sporty white car. She was stepping out with a big smile. In the closest spot to the house, a blue pickup came to a stop. Through the passenger window, he saw the pretty brunette from that morning, looking back at him with wide eyes and a shy smile. The truck's engine turned off and the brunette stepped out. She wore a new stylish outfit paired with sneakers. On the other side of the pickup was a tall, attractive young man who looked like he could be related to the brunette. He watched with a playful smile as Tyson stood on his steps in an apron, shorts that weren't fully visible, and sandals. "Do you greet all your visitors in just an apron?" Christy called out cheerfully. Tyson lifted the apron to show his shorts, making Christy gasp in surprise, probably thinking he was undressed underneath. "You know I don't have many guests except for you and George. Plus, I was baking cookies," he said. By then, Christy was next to another woman. "Tyson, this is my good friend Miranda Moreno, and this young man is her brother, Raul Jr." Tyson saw right away that Raul felt good about being called young, but didn't seem to like being called Junior. "Hello, Miranda, Raul." He received a bright smile from Miranda and a pleased grin from Raul, but he still looked a bit amused. Maybe he didn't like the idea of a man in an apron. "I'm really sorry I came into your backyard this morning without asking," Miranda said sincerely. Tyson waved his hand. "Would you like a freshly baked cookie?" "Ooh, the charming man is inviting us in with sweets. What could go wrong?" Christy joked, linking her arm with Miranda. Tyson stood back and held the door open for them. The ladies stepped inside while Raul paused with an irritated look. As Christy showed Miranda around, he glanced back at Tyson, who raised an eyebrow at him. "How can she call you charming when you're dressed like that?" Raul said with a frown. "Dressed like what? Who told you that kind of thinking is right?" Tyson shot back with a smile as he walked into the kitchen. He picked up a cookie, still warm, and handed it to Raul. The young man took a bite and nodded in appreciation as it melted in his mouth. Tyson then offered the plate of cookies to the ladies, who each took one. "Oh, this is so good," Christy said happily as she moved closer. "Thank you for the treats." She leaned in, making him feel a little shy about the affection, but he couldn't resist kissing her until she smiled and pulled back. Raul stared at them in shock. "What? He's a gentleman, great in the kitchen, organized and quite charming," Christy said. "Those are things women like—" Raul started to argue. "Seriously, where are you getting these silly ideas that work should be divided by gender? I thought I was old-fashioned. You make me feel young," Tyson replied. Raul looked at him, surprised. "How old are you?" 59. "What?" Raul turned to Christy in disbelief. "Are you dating a grandfather?" Tyson looked over at Miranda, who continued to stare. "What do you mean?" "Grandfather," she replied softly. Tyson thought about it, feeling a mix of anger and confusion. He wasn't sure why Christy was interested in Raul. He shrugged. "I might be old enough to be one, but I don't have any kids or grandkids. That part of my life is long gone," he said with a sigh. Raul wasn't done. He turned back to Christy, who was just watching with a small smile. I don't get it. I'm strong and, as you said, good looking. What does he have that I don't? I can bake cookies, Tyson interjected with a grin. Hey, I can show you how to make chocolate chip cookies. Girls love them, and if you make them, you'll impress them. My friends at the gym would think that's hilarious, Raoul exclaimed. Christy exchanged a knowing look with Miranda. I think we've found the root of Raoul's issues with masculinity. Issues? Being a man isn't a problem, he shot back. No, but when mixed with the way you treat women, it becomes an issue. You're smart. You could do better, Christy said frankly. Raoul turned to Tyson. Okay, you can teach me how to bake, but only if you can beat me in arm wrestling. Tyson blinked at Raoul, who seemed sure of his strength. He sighed, noticing Raoul's strong arms. This might not end well for him, but he was used to handling pain. Fine then, Tyson said, taking off his apron. Raoul looked a bit surprised. If it helps, you can take off your shirt too, Tyson suggested. In no time, Raoul followed suit. He wasn't as broad as Tyson, but he had long, smooth muscles. Christy nodded in approval, and Raoul wore a confident grin. Tyson approached the kitchen island and rested his elbow on it. Raoul grasped his hand, and they gripped their left hands on the countertop. Christy placed her hand on top of theirs. When I lift my hand, you start. Ready? They nodded. Go! Tyson felt the strain almost immediately in his hand, arm, shoulder, and back. Raoul was indeed strong, but he had an air of overconfidence. Looking into Raoul's eyes, Tyson smiled and pushed harder. The strain increased, but he kept the pressure on. Raoul's confident expression shifted to surprise, then concern. Tyson's smile widened as he locked eyes with Raoul. Arm wrestling is not just about strength. It's also about who can handle the most pressure. How much struggle have you faced in your young life, Raoul? The younger man shook his head, wincing as Tyson held on tightly. Are you ready to get serious? Tyson asked softly, and Raoul looked surprised as his arm was bent backward. When his arm reached an uncomfortable angle, he yelped and pulled away, freeing himself from Tyson's grip. Raoul shook his arm to get the feeling back. Wow, for someone older, you're really strong, he said, amazed. Raoul? Miranda called out, but Tyson just laughed. Christy smiled at the teacher. How many arm wrestling matches have you won? Tyson chuckled, rubbing his arm. That was the first time I ever did that. Maybe the last. The kid's quite strong. Raoul looked at him, feeling a mix of surprise and pride. Don't tell him that. It will get to his head, Miranda sighed. Tyson shook his head with a grin. Come on, let's get started on the cookies. Put your shirt back on. He tied on his apron again. Raoul put his shirt on, shaking his head. It's hard to take you seriously in that. I'll admit it looks better on my wife, but if you've ever cooked bacon without a shirt, you'll understand. He looked at Raoul. Never try it without a shirt. This made everyone wince and laugh. And you know what you need to wear one of these comfortably? Raoul wanted to seem smart, but was confused about where Tyson was going with this. Confidence. People respond to that. Don't confuse it with arrogance. Confidence is being at ease with yourself. It's not about how you look that makes you a man. Raoul smiled and nodded. Let's make cookies. Christy and Miranda sat at the counter, watching the two men bake chocolate chip cookies from scratch. Tyson mostly guided Raoul, letting him do all the work. When the cookies were ready and cool enough to try, the women cheered for Raoul's successful baking. Raoul smiled at Tyson, enjoying the praise from Christy. What do you do? Tyson shook his head. I'm retired. But what did you do before that? Raoul pressed. Tyson sighed. I was a math teacher. No way. You're a math whiz, Raoul said, laughing. Christy moved closer to Tyson, leaning against him as she talked to Raoul. Certified genius-level math whiz, she teased. Tyson chuckled and gave her a sweet kiss. You say the nicest things. He looked at Raoul, who seemed uncertain about Christy's affection toward him. If you're so smart, why aren't you teaching? Raoul asked, a bit confrontational. Tyson's smile faded. People keep saying that, and I keep telling them I'm done. He's got a lot on his mind, Miranda said sharply. Raoul looked at him in surprise. Tyson shot a look at Miranda, then turned to Christy. You have been talking about me with others? He asked. Christy met his gaze and nodded. Miranda had a great idea, and we're here to make it happen. Tyson was surprised by her boldness since he expected her to be defensive. Idea? "Come outside," Christy said with a big smile. And once again, Tyson found himself drawn in by her excitement. Miranda stood behind them, also smiling. Her brother followed, looking worried. In the driveway, Raoul pulled off a tarp covering the back of the truck. He revealed a road bicycle. It was a shiny silver with bright green accents and black wheels. Raoul lifted it out, and Miranda took it from him. She and Christy brought it over to Tyson. Then Raoul pulled back another blanket and took out another bicycle. Tyson watched as the two women turned the silver bike so he could see it better. "Christy bought you a bicycle!" Miranda cheered. Tyson looked at the beautiful blonde, his mouth open with surprise. She bit her lip nervously, and he closed his mouth, returning his gaze to the sleek bike. "It's amazing! It looks so fast, even just standing there," he said. "Do you know how to ride one?" Raoul asked, and suddenly the two women looked worried, realizing he might not. Tyson couldn't help but laugh at their faces. He smiled at Raoul. "Yes, I can ride, though it's been a while and I don't see where to change gears." Miranda breathed a sigh of relief and quickly pointed out that the brake levers also worked as gear shifters. Tyson took Christy's hand and looked into her eyes. "Thank you. This is really thoughtful of you." He admired the bike again. "It's not a car. It feels different. You can't drive it like a car. It helps you exercise, and you can go farther, much faster than walking. Now you can get into town easily," Christy said. "I was set on getting you a car when Miranda had the idea of a bike. She loves biking, so she saw it from a different angle. I hope you don't mind I talked to her about it." As Tyson watched Christy, he noticed she seemed to be getting anxious. Oh. It suddenly clicked. She was planning to leave. They had discussed it as something for the future, but it seemed that future was coming sooner than expected. He glanced at the others. "Can you give us a minute?" When Miranda nodded, he gently led Christy to a quieter spot. "When do you go?" he asked softly. She took a breath she didn't realize she was holding. "End of next week." He nodded, but he felt something tighten in his stomach. "This is a big chance for you?" She nodded, and tears started to fill her eyes. "Hey, no tears. We knew this day would arrive, and there's no reason to cry. We're good friends and always will be. I'll always be cheering for you in whatever you decide to do." He looked over at Miranda as another piece of the puzzle came together. "Did you ask your friend to look after me?" he inquired. Christy sniffed. "It's more like you can help each other. My other friends might stop reaching out to her when I'm gone. They don't understand her like I do, and she makes them a bit uneasy. She doesn't have anyone else because she can be a bit shy. She could use a friend to help her feel better about herself. Plus, she hasn't had great luck with boyfriends lately. She rides alone, and I worry about that. She should be with other cyclists. Could you ride with her sometimes? I hope you enjoy biking." He felt relieved that he wasn't just a charity case. "I love biking. Thank you so much. I will definitely ride it, and if it helps me feel free, that's even better." "Great, because I have more surprises," she said excitedly and ran to her car. She grabbed a couple of bags from the trunk and hurried back to him. In one of the bags was a bike helmet. It was shiny black with lots of ventilation holes. There were a few bright stripes on the sides, matching the bike. He also noticed black fingerless gloves with padded palms. "Is this going to fit over all my hair?" he asked. "Maybe I should cut it short like before." "No!" Christy and Miranda shouted, both laughing. Christy was the first to stop laughing. "Your hair is beautiful and fits your new style. Leave it long, please," she said with a playful look. He sighed. Pushing his hair back, he managed to put the helmet on, but his hair was sticking out behind it. Miranda stepped forward and gathered his hair. "You should tie it back before you put the helmet on." "Right, good idea." He noticed she was still holding his hair. "You can let go now," he said with a smile. She gave him an embarrassed smile and stepped back. Next, Christy pulled out black bike shorts, black ankle socks, and a black cycling jersey from the shopping bag. She held the jersey out to him, and he lifted it by the shoulders. Tyson laughed happily as the shirt, a deep black, was covered in math formulas that looked like chalk scribbles. "A math nerd cycling shirt? This is amazing!" Christy and Miranda smiled brightly, sharing the joy of the moment. "Go put them on," Christy said. "Nothing goes on under the bike shorts," Miranda replied, her face turning red. He took off his helmet and left it with Miranda as he went inside the house with the clothes. In his room, He changed into the bike shorts, which felt snug. The padding made him feel strange, almost like he was wearing something extra. He put on the jersey, which also fit closely, but it didn't get in his way. Looking in the mirror, he noticed his hair was as long as Imani's once was. He went to her dresser and opened the top right drawer. Inside were Imani's hair ties. He picked a white one and tied his hair back as best as he could. He looked in the mirror again and thought it looked okay. He put on new socks and his sneakers at the front door. He didn't have the cool shoes that Miranda had. As he walked outside, he heard Christy whistle. "The pants could be a little less tight," he said. "No, they look great," Christy said, smiling at him. She walked over and gently patted his chest while looking at how the jersey fit. "I need to go, but I'd like to visit this weekend. Saturday afternoon to Sunday afternoon?" He smiled back. "Sure, that sounds nice." He thought this might be one of their last times together, so he planned to make her a good meal and clear the counter by the sink. Christy leaned in and kissed him softly. For a moment he was lost in the kiss, until Raoul made a noise, pulling Tyson back to reality. He stepped back from Christy, who smiled at him before heading to Miranda. Moments later, she was giggling as she skipped to her car. As the white coupe drove away, Tyson glanced at Miranda and noticed she was watching him with surprised eyes, though her gaze was more focused below his waist. He realized that his earlier feelings from kissing Christy might be showing through the tight shorts. He closed his eyes and tried to calm himself. "I have things to do too. Are you staying here, sis?" Raoul asked, a bit impatient. "Yes, I'm going to make sure Tyson's bike is set up properly. Maybe we can go for a ride?" she replied with a hopeful look. He nodded and her smile grew bigger. "Nice meeting you, Raoul," Tyson said with a wave. The young man smiled and nodded. "Yeah, nice to meet you. Take care." Miranda and Tyson watched as Raoul drove away and then walked over to the bicycles. "You don't have special cycling shoes yet, so they put on regular pedals that will work with your sneakers. You should think about getting cycling shoes soon because they help with better pedaling," she explained. She had him sit on the bike seat as he leaned against the house. She adjusted the seat, moved it back a bit, and tightened everything. "When you get the new shoes and pedals, you can make it even better. For now, this is good." She smiled at him, and he nodded, feeling pleased. "Do you want to go for a ride now?" she asked. "Sure, just let me lock up the house." Tyson went inside, picked up his wallet, keys, and cell phone. He noticed that his jersey had a pocket on his lower back, so he put his items there after locking the door. Putting on the helmet was easier now that his hair was sorted out. He put on the gloves last and felt confident in his new gear. As they walked their bikes across the gravel to the road, Tyson smiled shyly at Miranda. "I used to ride bikes all the time when I was a kid. When I was in college in Europe, everyone rode bikes, so I got back into it. But it's been years since I last rode one. This feels a bit intimidating." "How about we ride slowly and get used to the gears and brakes as we go east along the road?" she suggested. He agreed and swung his leg over the bike. It didn't take long for Tyson to find his balance on the new bike. It rolled smoothly and the steering felt nice. Miranda gave him tips on shifting gears based on the road and its incline. He learned to shift gears and, more importantly, how to use the brakes. He was careful not to fall over. They rode east along the lakeside road, picking up speed as they went. It felt so natural. Christy had been right. Cycling was nothing like driving. It didn't trigger his anxiety at all. He loved it. Before long, they reached the end of the road where the new road into town began. He saw Miranda's encouraging smile, took a deep breath, and nodded. She beamed with happiness and turned left, heading north. He followed behind her, trying not to feel shy. "Are we going to take the trail or stay on the road?" he asked. "Would you mind if we stayed on the road?" she replied, and he shook his head. "Either is fine with me," he said. "Then let's stick to the road." Seeing no cars on the trail, they rolled over a small bump and continued on the flat road. The smooth surface felt great as they rode and talked. Most of the conversation was Miranda sharing stories about rides she had been on. She enjoyed the social aspect of group rides, though she found the local cycling club had some members who acted superior. Miranda looked at him with hope once more. "I really want you to love cycling enough to maybe start a cycling group with me." He laughed. "So far, I'm enjoying it." "This is great." Her smile was bright. Tyson finally noticed a small object attached to her helmet. His helmet didn't have that. "What's on your helmet?" "Oh, it's a video camera. I sometimes record my rides," she explained. "Is it on now?" "No, I always ask before recording someone. I didn't know if you'd mind," she said shyly. "If you want to record, go ahead," he replied. She smiled back at him. "This part of the ride is pretty flat, so I'll wait until we turn back. The original country road is much more fun to film." Tyson remembered that road and felt a little uneasy thinking about the return trip. He tried to shake off that feeling and focused on enjoying the ride. Cycling felt different and more freeing than driving, which helped him relax. He began to look forward to how the bike would handle the curvy road. As they approached the town's edge, he felt a rush of excitement. He was biking here without the heavy sedation he'd had before. Of course, he was here for surgery, which was a serious situation. He glanced around and noticed some new shops he didn't recognize. The area had changed a lot, and some things were better, while others were not. "Hey, an ice cream shop," he said, excited. When she heard him, Miranda stopped and got off her bike. She walked it to the outdoor tables as Tyson hurried to catch up. "My treat," Tyson said with a big smile. "What do you want?" "A scoop of chocolate, please," she replied with a smile as she sat down at one of the tables. They had the patio to themselves. Excitedly, Tyson leaned his bike against a table and rushed inside the shop. Miranda felt happy. Tyson seemed to be enjoying the ride, which was a good sign for her idea to start a cycling group. She would be happy even if it ended up just being the two of them. Then she remembered something Christy had said about their past experiences. Suddenly, the thought made her feel a little strange. A car came into view. Blake Carlington was parking his BMW convertible. She noticed him checking to see if she was alone, and she felt uncomfortable. She turned on her helmet camera just to be safe. "Where's Christy?" he asked sharply. Miranda didn't like Blake. He had a way of looking at her that reminded her of someone else who made her uncomfortable. "I don't know where she is," she said flatly. "My friend at the bike shop told me Christy spent a lot of money on a silver Cannondale racing bike, and here it is," he said as he got out of his car. "This just proves how untrustworthy you are. First the stories about Vince, and now this." He reached for the bike. "Don't touch it. It's not yours, just like Christy isn't yours to touch." She could see Blake getting angry as he stared at her. "You should watch how you talk to people like me," he warned. "Maybe I should teach you some respect." He stepped closer, and she wished she had been quieter. "Hey, back off right now." Tyson's deep voice broke through the tense moment, and Miranda felt relief flood through her shaky body. "Mind your own business, oh!" Blake growled, turning to see the large man approaching. He took a few steps back from Miranda as he noticed Tyson's strong build. The two small ice cream cones in Tyson's hands made him look even more formidable. Knowing he was a math enthusiast and nearly 60 added to the humor. She managed not to laugh and smiled wide as she took the chocolate ice cream from him. She watched Blake's face change as he put things together. It was clear he was registering Tyson's cycling outfit and the new bike. Her smile grew mischievous. "Who are you?" Blake challenged Tyson. "Who are you?" Tyson replied as he enjoyed a lick of his melting vanilla ice cream. "That's Blake, Christy's ex-fiance," Miranda said cheerfully. "Oh," Tyson responded, and she could see that he was understanding. His body language shifted as he stood against the younger man, licking his ice cream again. Blake was staring back and forth between Tyson and the nice bike Christy had bought. "For him?" "Who are you?" Blake asked again. "Tyson Kane." "Christy's new partner," Miranda added excitedly. Tyson looked at her and shook his head, signaling her to be quiet. He frowned at his melting ice cream and moved it around with his tongue while Miranda watched him, intrigued. Blake's face showed his irritation as he sized Tyson up. "She left me for you?" "No. Christy's choice to end the engagement had nothing to do with me," Tyson said firmly. Miranda chimed in. "Christy seems a lot happier now than she was with Blake." Tyson looked at her in frustration. "You're not helping!" Miranda's eyes grew wide in fear when she saw Blake jump at Tyson while Tyson was focused on her. Tyson reached out and accidentally pushed his ice cream cone into Blake's face, causing Blake to stumble backward, his vision blocked by the cold dessert. Tyson stayed back, watching cautiously, while Blake, blinded, threw a few wild punches. He unintentionally hit a nearby pole. and the sound of his hand hurting made both Miranda and Tyson wince. Blake stopped swinging and cried out in pain. "That's not good. I'll call for help," Tyson said with a sigh as he took out his phone. After hanging up, he asked Miranda to grab some napkins from the shop. When she went outside, a police car pulled up. She handed some napkins to Blake, who was sitting at a table, cradling his hurt hand. The rest of the napkins went to Tyson to clean off the ice cream. Miranda turned off her helmet camera, took out the chip, and put it into her phone to save the video. 2 police officers approached their group. "Did someone call for help?" Tyson started to explain when Blake interrupted, shouting, "I was attacked!" Miranda jumped up, and Tyson placed a finger to his lips to quiet her before addressing the officers. He showed them his ID. "I called for help. Mr. Carlington was upset by something Miss Moreno said about his past relationship. He decided to act aggressively. Liar! He hit me with his ice cream first. I had to defend myself," Blake shouted, but then realized how silly that sounded. The officer looking at Tyson's ID smiled at him. "I wouldn't have recognized you. You look so different from the guy I found before." Tyson froze, surprised by the officer's words. "Officer Patricks, I was the one who found you back then when you were hurt. You've healed well," the officer said, and returned the ID. Miranda noticed Tyson was struggling to respond, but eventually he nodded with a stiff smile. "Yes, it took time, but I'm okay now. Thank you, Officer Patricks," Tyson replied, and shook the officer's hand while his partner smiled too. Miranda saw the worried look on Blake's face as he realized he might not get his way. She grinned, ready to make his day even worse. "Would you like to see what really happened?" she asked the officers. Everyone turned to her and she pointed to the camera on her bike helmet. "I recorded it." Blake looked a bit sick. Miranda beamed at the officers. "The video starts when Blake arrived at the curb." She glanced at Blake, who was squinting at her. "Yes, I recorded all your hurtful comments, and I'll be going to the police tomorrow to report the threats you made against me." She particularly enjoyed seeing the worry on his face. What a nice day. Tyson saw how pleased Miranda looked. She really didn't like Blake. "Are you going to report this, Mr. Kane?" Officer Patrick asked, pulling him back to the moment. He didn't have the energy to pursue the matter further. "No, I thought the ice cream in his face would be enough to cool him off. His hitting the lamppost was justice enough for me. I hope he learned something from it," Tyson replied with a sigh. He watched as Miranda handed Officer Patrick's partner the memory card from the camera. She put a spare card in the camera for their journey home. After saying their goodbyes, Tyson saw the police take Blake to the ambulance that had just arrived. He stepped into the ice cream shop to wash his hands. When he came back out, he turned to Miranda. "Are you ready to go on?" She nodded happily. The drive through downtown was surprising for Tyson. It seemed like there had been a big improvement project, as the streetlights looked new and the roads were clean and painted. Many of the buildings looked fresh too. The area had really come to life. Considering this was the place that could have been destroyed if the 2 students had gone through with their plan, he wondered why the town council had chosen to improve this area. Maybe the media attention forced them to act. The funds might have been used for their own gain, which made this all the more satisfying. He was happy to see new energy here, and young people from the local university enjoying themselves at the boutique shops and nice coffee places. As they got closer to the university, Tyson realized that getting from his place to these buildings wasn't far or hard at all. The idea of visiting George again came to him suddenly. He slowed down, and Miranda looked at him with curiosity. "Do you think it would be all right if I said hello to George?" he asked. She smiled brightly at him. "That sounds like a great idea. Which building?" A long time ago, the math department was in the Clement Hall building," he said, a bit unsure. "It's still there." She rode across the campus and stopped at the bench outside the building. Miranda pointed for him to lay his bike down on the grass next to hers. "I'll keep an eye on the bikes. Take your time," she said as she pulled her phone from her pocket. He placed his helmet on the bike, then Tyson made his way up the steps to the large double doors of the building. Once he reached the top, he paused to look at himself. Wearing cycling clothes wasn't the fanciest outfit to wear to his old workplace. He took a deep breath and sighed. He was retired now and didn't need to impress anyone. He pulled the door open and walked inside. The admin offices were right to his right. George's office was behind that, but Tyson wasn't part of the staff anymore. He could just ask the office staff to check if George was available. He opened the door and stopped at the counter. Two young women looked over at him. "We don't handle courier deliveries here," one said. Tyson chuckled softly. "I'm not a courier. I'm looking for George Haley. I'm an old friend. Is he here?" He noticed the office door open behind him, but kept his focus on the young woman at the counter. She was looking at him with some doubt. "I'll need a name," she said firmly. "Tyson Kane." He heard a noise to his right, then saw an older woman staring at him in surprise. She was quite small, with sensible shoes and wearing a simple tan blouse under a brown sweater with a matching skirt. Even though she had gray hair, her bright green eyes stood out. He remembered her name, Gail Sampson. She had been George's secretary for many years. "Tyson?" she asked, her voice a bit shaky. He smiled back. "Hello, Gail." "Oh my goodness, Tyson!" she exclaimed, and hurried over to hug him. He looked down in surprise, but then gently hugged her back. He noticed the two office girls staring at them in disbelief. Gail pulled back and grinned up at him. "You made it to the university." Tyson glanced at the two women listening in and smiled back at Gail. "Yes, well, it wasn't just me. A student named Miranda Moreno suggested I could ride a bike instead of driving. It worked. Here I am." He looked around. "It's still hard to believe I'm here." "You have to see George," Gail said with enthusiasm. He nodded. "Is he in his office? I'd like to say hello." "No, he's in class. Come with me," she insisted. Tyson hesitated. "I don't want to interrupt him or his class." Gail locked eyes with him as she opened the office door. "George would be upset if I didn't bring you to see him right away." She led him up the stairs at the end of the hall to the third floor. The door for the third classroom on the right was closed, and Tyson tried to stop her, but she made a scolding sound, knocked on the door, and opened it. George Haley was at the front of the class, looking frustrated. His wild white hair made it seem like he had been tugging at it. He turned to the door and froze when he saw Tyson standing there. A math book dropped from his hands and hit the floor with a loud thud. Gail gently nudged Tyson forward, and he stepped into the room, feeling the attention of the 18 students shift to him. "You're here?" George exclaimed, his eyes wide with surprise. "How?" George asked, breathless. "A student named Miranda Moreno suggested that if I couldn't travel by car, maybe I could ride a bicycle instead." He looked around the classroom. "It seems I can," he said modestly. "You can't travel in a car? That's boring," a student piped up. "Mr. Phillips, you're about to fail my class. You need to apologize for your lack of understanding or leave my classroom," George shouted, glaring at the stunned young man. "George, it's fine. Being young and not thinking things through isn't a crime, and it's not the end of the world." "There's always hope," Tyson said as he moved closer to his friend. "Apologize," George said quietly, his tone serious. "I'm sorry," Mr. Phillips said quickly. Tyson watched his friend, who seemed to be calming down. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to disrupt your class. I managed to come to town without any trouble, and I thought I would visit you since you visited me so often," Tyson explained. "That's amazing, and I appreciate you sharing this moment with me," George said, stepping forward to hold Tyson's hands. "Mr. Haley, can you introduce us to your friend?" asked a lovely raven-haired girl with a short haircut in the front row. Tyson felt her gaze on him. George let go of Tyson's hands and smiled brightly at the girl. "Of course, Miss DeWitt." He placed a hand on Tyson's back and turned him to face the students. "This is my good friend, Tyson Kane." Some students looked surprised. They seemed to recognize him from events 6 years ago. Miss DeWitt appeared to be one of those people. The same Tyson Kane who... Yes, but even more important, he's Tyson Kane, the math genius. Tyson smiled at his friend's excitement but shook his head, feeling shy. Noticing the doubt on the students' faces, George glanced at the clock. "All right, we have 20 minutes left in class. How many of you are still confused about this chapter?" All hands went up and the professor frowned. He then looked at Tyson with hope. "I've messed this up. Can you help them?" Tyson stepped back slightly, then looked at the eager young faces. He didn't even notice he was moving to the front of the class until George handed him the textbook he had dropped earlier. He looked down at the page and saw what they were studying. To understand their issues better, he began asking them what they found difficult. Once he gathered enough information, he had everyone stand up, reach their arms out, shake them, and blow raspberries to clear their minds. He showed them how to do it, and after some laughter, he got 16 out of 18 students to join in. Mr. Phillips and the boy beside him did not participate. Tyson turned his focus to them. "Mr. Phillips and—" he asked, looking at the embarrassed man. "Mr. Kent?" the young man replied quietly. Tyson nodded. "Mr. Phillips and Mr. Kent, you need to clear your mind. Try something completely different from what you have done before. How about this?" He suddenly posed like a strong athlete and made a funny noise, making the class laugh. Mr. Kent joined in and copied him perfectly, so Tyson clapped. Mr. Phillips made a weak attempt, which Tyson accepted with a nod. "Great! Now that we're feeling fresh, let me share a little story," Tyson said cheerfully. 12 minutes later, the students were leaving the room, chatting excitedly. Tyson leaned back against the desk, feeling a warmth inside him that he thought was lost. Miss DeWitt stopped in front of him. "Thank you for coming today. We all feel much better now that we understand. If you wanted to visit us more often, we would love to have you. I would really appreciate it." She smiled and walked out, giving him a look over her shoulder. George wore a big, pleased smile, and Gail leaned against the wall by the door, smiling too. Tyson shook off the gentle invitation. "Thanks for letting me try again. That was enjoyable." George shook his head. "Enjoyable, he calls it enjoyable. Did you see how frustrated I was when you arrived? This topic isn't fun unless you truly love it. For you, it comes alive. For me, it's just hard work. No one listens to me, but you had every student hanging on your every word." "Not Mr. Phillips." George sighed. "No, not him. He came in with his guard up." Tyson nodded. "You can't help someone who doesn't want to be helped." He looked at George and Gail. "I missed you both." Gail stepped closer. "We missed you too. The students missed you as well. They've been listening to George for too long. They need you back." Tyson looked at her in surprise. "I was only helping George this one time. I'm retired." "You did me a huge favor, and I really appreciate it," George said, giving him a friendly pat on the arm. "But you can't tell me you didn't feel it, the excitement of connecting, the joy of reaching their minds, the reward of helping them learn. You are a teacher. Math is your passion. Teaching is second nature to you. The students haven't left my classes as inspired as they did after those 20 minutes with you. I'm passionate about physics, and I've been covering these math classes. They could be yours again, and everyone would gain from it." George paused when he saw that Tyson was going to argue, so he raised his hands. "We might be a bit too excited about the new freedom you have. Take some time to think about it, and remember you can always visit us. I believe Miss DeWitt mentioned other things would be welcome too." "George Haley?" Gail said with a light scolding tone. "I'm just saying," George replied with a grin and a shrug. Tyson gave George a hug and then hugged Gail, who accepted it with a big smile. "I should go now since I left Miranda waiting outside with the bikes." "Ah, we should go with you to thank her in person," George said, and Gail nodded in agreement. Tyson led his friends downstairs and out the front door to meet Miranda, who was waiting. Gail stepped forward and hugged the surprised girl, followed by George. "Thank you so much for helping Tyson find a way to get out of his isolation," George said excitedly. "Oh, it wasn't anything special. I was hoping he would enjoy cycling enough to ride with me," she said shyly. Gail gave her hand a gentle pat. "It was still your idea to help him get to town. None of us thought of that, and George has been visiting him for years." She looked at George with a hint of annoyance, but he just shrugged it off. George observed Tyson put on his helmet and looked at the bicycle, his eyebrows raised. "That's a nice bike. How much did it cost?" Tyson blinked and turned to Miranda. She looked like she wanted to change the subject. "How much did Christy pay for the bike?" he asked. Miranda looked up at him. $6,000, she said quietly. "What?" Tyson gasped. Miranda bit her lip, looking a bit anxious. Tyson frowned. "I need to talk to her about that." George placed a hand on Tyson's arm. "The price doesn't compare to the value of your freedom." Tyson considered his friend's words for a moment before nodding. "We should get going. It was great seeing you both again. I'll come back for more visits." "Think about what we talked about too," Gail added, and he gave her a stiff nod as well. They hopped back on their bicycles and waved goodbye to George and Gail as they rode away from the campus. The route they took, guided by new signs, led them to the western edge of town, where a winding country road began. The entrance was blocked to cars, but they rode between the metal posts. Picking up their pace, Tyson began to smile again as the bike glided up and down the gentle hills and took the turns smoothly. He had to admit it was a well-made bike. Even so, he felt that $6,000 was too much for Christy to spend on him. He decided he would ask her to let him pay for part of it because being too generous could be a problem. On a straight stretch of road, he glanced at Miranda, who was looking at him. "Are you upset with us?" she asked. "No, you meant well," he replied. "I'm sure I could have ridden a bike that cost less than $1,000 and still enjoyed it almost as much as I do this amazing bicycle." He sighed, feeling the joy of the ride. "So, does this mean you'll keep going on rides with me?" Miranda asked. He smiled when he saw the road starting to rise ahead. "Yes, for sure. I want to go on more rides with you. This is great." Miranda squealed with happiness and then sped off, giggling. He lifted himself off the seat to catch up. He felt like a kid again, and it felt good. Devin Wilson walked through the hospital's emergency ward, feeling down. Once, the chief surgeon brightened up the room when he came in, and the nurses were always excited to see him. Now, they seemed to avoid him. He couldn't blame them. He knew he was a bit short-tempered these days. Two police officers were waiting with a young man whose body language showed he was used to privilege. Devin couldn't fully relate, but he understood the life of comfort. He had grown up in a wealthy family, never wanted for anything. He attended top schools and went to a well-known medical college. He was active in the best sports clubs and socialized with rich people. His marriage to Cecily had been more about connections than love, and it ended poorly. After the divorce, he decided he didn't want to marry again, although for one special woman, he might have reconsidered. But that wasn't meant to be. With a sigh, he took the patient's chart and walked over to them. One look at the sheet showed that the young man had hurt his right hand. He would check the X-ray results on the computer after talking to him. The three men looked at him as he approached. "Hello, Mr. Carlington. I see you've hurt your right hand. Can you tell me how that happened?" "I hit it against something hard," was the short answer. "Something or someone? When the police are here, there often is another person involved," Devin said. "I was trying to hit someone in self-defense, but I hit a light post instead," Blake mumbled. Devin glanced at the officers. "Was the other person hurt in any way?" "No, Mr. Kane managed to dodge the punch. Mr. Carlington was lucky that Tyson didn't decide to retaliate. The guy's built like a tank." Devin blinked as a headache started to form. "Did you say Tyson Kane?" The officer nodded. "I was told he was badly hurt and stuck at home with a condition," Devin replied, shocked. The officer laughed. "I don't know about that, but he certainly didn't look hurt to me." He was riding bikes with a girl and seemed happy about it. "Hey!" Devin stormed away from them and dropped the patient file at the nurse's station as a sharp pain hit his head. Kane was biking with someone he didn't like? No way. He left the building, got into his Porsche Carrera, and sped out of the parking lot. He zipped through town and sped down the new road leading to the lake. He was able to push the engine on the smooth, quiet road, and the scenery blurred by. As he turned onto the lakefront road, he had to swerve to avoid a young woman on a bike. It might have been the girl with Kane. He waved her off angrily from the car window and sped away down the road. He knew exactly where Tyson lived. He had been there once before. Devin pulled into the gravel driveway and stepped out of his car. He walked up to the door, his mind racing. He wasn't sure what he would say or do, but he had to see for himself if what the police said was true. He knocked hard on the door and it swung open. He stood there, staring at the man in front of him. He didn't look hurt. He didn't seem weak like he should have been. This was unbelievable. He looked healthier than Devin. "Wilson? What on earth?" Tyson gasped as Devin struck him hard in the stomach, pushing him back into the living room. Then he hit him again and again with every move he knew that caused pain. He wanted Kane to pay. When he came back to reality, he stood over Tyson, breathing heavily, his hands aching. Kane's body was firm and strong with no extra weight. Devin had hurt his own fingers by hitting Tyson with the moves learned from his martial arts training, which he had never used on anyone, until now. He frowned down at the surprised man on the floor, wondering how he had survived the accident that had taken Imani from him. "Why are you still alive?" Devon asked roughly. Tyson looked up at him. "You hurt me, but you didn't kill me." "No! Why didn't the train take you too?" Devon yelled, spitting his words in frustration. Tyson paused as pain shot through him. "I don't know. Sometimes. I wish it had." Devon hit Tyson again, but pulled back his hand, hissing from the pain himself. Tyson blinked as he pushed through the pain and looked up at the surgeon. "It's pretty foolish for a doctor to hurt his hands like this." Devon glared down at him. "You're right, but I forgot. You think you're so smart." Then he kicked Tyson hard in the side. He heard Tyson groan, and then something heavy landed on his back and hit him in the face. He turned, and the female cyclist fell onto the sofa with a thump. Devon nervously touched his face and winced. His fingers came back wet. "You did not just do that! What did you do to my face?" Devon demanded, taking a step toward the frightened woman. Before he could continue, a sudden force gripped his ankle, sending a sharp wave of pain through him. "Miranda! Go!" Tyson shouted. She jumped off the couch and dashed out the open front door. Devon aimed a kick at Tyson, but Tyson blocked it, releasing his grip on Devon's ankle. Devon turned his gaze toward the door, his face filled with anger, but Tyson's quiet voice stopped him. "She told me." Devon froze, the words echoing in his mind. He looked down to see Tyson, bloodied but meeting his gaze, his eyes filled with a steady, silent intensity. "She told you? Told you what?" Devon asked in a low voice, feeling anger rise within him. "Did she say we?" Tyson said nothing, just held Devon's gaze with a look that felt like judgment. "I loved her. I would have been a better husband than the careless man you were back then," Devon yelled. Tyson's voice softened. "Tu loved her too," he replied quietly. "Then maybe you should have shown it better, or she wouldn't have turned to me," Devon retorted, bitterness clear in his tone. A look in Tyson's eyes told Devon that he hadn't known this. The realization struck Tyson with visible pain, and Devon felt a dark satisfaction, determined to make Tyson understand just how much he'd hurt too. The first time was in Indianapolis. We met after a convention, and one thing led to another. She didn't want to go too far, but even then, I was drawn to her. She was hesitant, but there was something between us. Devon took a dark satisfaction in the pain showing on Tyson's face, so he went on, feeding off the effect his words had. "She kept her distance at work, but when we met at another conference in San Francisco, it was different. She was drawn to me, Tyson. Every chance we got, we were together, and eventually I realized I loved her." Devon began to pace, the words flowing out as he struggled with his own frustration. "I wanted her to leave you, to be with me completely. I even came here to ask her to start over with me, to tell her I'd make her happy." He took a deep, bitter breath. "But she said no. She said she loved you." His expression turned pained, almost haunted. "She loved you, but still wanted me close. How could that be love?" he muttered, lost in the memories. Devon's face twisted with sorrow as he recalled the last time they'd been together. "I thought if we could truly be together, she'd understand we were meant to be. But she made me leave, told me to walk away." His voice softened, laced with regret. "She should have loved me." "That night, you went to the party." Devon kicked Tyson hard in the side, but then Tyson struck back, hitting Devon right on the nose. Devon felt a sharp pain and light flashed in front of him. He opened one eye to see Tyson falling to his knees, tired and spent. Devon was ready to retaliate for what had happened, but then a sudden blow landed that made him cry out in pain. He fell to the ground, unable to move. Tyson knelt on the floor, feeling exhausted, but he knew he needed to do something. Suddenly, red and blue lights filled the room, and he had nothing left to give. Just as he sank down, he lost consciousness. Tyson woke up in a hospital room, the lights dim. Panic filled him as he struggled to remember what had happened. It felt like he had just returned from a terrible experience. The pain he felt then was much worse compared to what he felt now. But the emotional pain was still heavy. Devon's words echoed in his mind, causing a deep ache in his heart. Every single breath felt hard. "I'm sorry," he murmured to someone not there. He couldn't focus on that now. He shut his eyes and thought through his problems. But when he opened them again, The person he thought of was still there, looking far too beautiful. He turned away. "Please go," he said softly. "I can't." "Why?" he shouted. That question lingered in his mind. He wanted answers he knew he would never find, especially not from an image in his head. "Mr. Kane? Are you awake?" A nurse walked in, looking worried. Tyson realized tears were flowing down his cheeks. He reached for a tissue, and the nurse handed it to him. After drying his face, he nodded. "Yes, thank you. Sorry for yelling." She offered a sympathetic smile. "It's okay. You've been through a lot today." He smiled back weakly. "It wasn't all bad. I enjoyed cycling again and saw my friends at campus. Well, the end was not good." He shifted in his bed. "Wilson didn't break any bones, did he?" "No, as far as I know, you just have many bruises. They just want to keep you here for the night because you were unconscious when they brought you in." She looked towards the door briefly and then smiled at him. "Dr. Wilson has broken bones in both hands and his face needs help. He doesn't look good at all. I don't know what happened with his groin, but the other doctors seemed uncomfortable." Tyson's face fell. "Wilson hurt my wife." The nurse gasped. "How do you know?" His face looked serious. He was bragging. He didn't see how that wouldn't make her care for him. Tyson felt a soft touch on his cheek. Was he crying again? He reached up to dry his tears, but they just kept coming. The nurse stayed by him until he fell asleep from being so tired. The next morning, Tyson was in a wheelchair at the hospital's exit, arguing with the staff. They wanted to give him a ride home, but he insisted he could manage on his own. He became more upset until Miranda appeared beside him. He looked up at her, feeling relieved. "It's okay. We can take him now," she told the office worker and pointed outside. Raoul was in his truck in the driveway. The clerk nodded and left. Tyson looked at Miranda, looking worried. "I can't." She touched his shoulder. "I know. How much are you hurting?" He blinked at her. "I'm sore, but I can walk." "If you can walk, you can ride your bike," she said, helping him outside. Raoul was taking Tyson's bike out of the back of the truck. Tyson smiled at Miranda in thanks, and she responded with a warm smile. Then he was confused. "How did you get my bike from my house?" "After the ambulances took you and Wilson away, I used your keys from the counter to lock up. Raoul picked me up and brought me to the hospital, but they wouldn't let me see you. This morning I called to check when you would be released. We got your bike, helmet, and gloves from your place and locked up again." Miranda held his hand. "When he drove past me on the road, he almost hit me and he looked so mad. I got a bad feeling, so I rode back and saw him standing over you. I didn't think before I jumped in to help. He threw me off and looked like he would hurt me too when you stopped him. When you told me to run, I went just to the driveway and called the police. He didn't follow, so I went back to listen for the police. I gave them a report after you were taken away and told them everything I heard." Tyson looked into her eyes. "The police know what happened to her?" Miranda nodded, and after a moment he nodded back. He put on his gloves and helmet while Raoul got Miranda's bike from the truck too. His brother waved them off and drove away. Tyson carefully got on the bike and took a few breaths to steady himself. Besides some aches from his bruises, he felt all right. He followed Miranda as they rode out of the driveway and across town to the path leading to the lake. He loved this familiar road and was thankful they could go slowly without worrying about cars. Miranda was happy to just ride alongside him in silence. Soon they reached the lakefront road and stopped before his driveway. "Thank you so much for bringing my bike to the hospital." I was not eager to walk home. He reached out for his keys. "My bag is inside," she said. "Your bag?" he replied. "I talked to Christy and told her everything that happened. We both think you should not be alone tonight. She is out of town, so I'm staying." Tyson frowned. "I've been alone for 6 years. I don't need... You know it's different now. I wish I could have been there with you last night. You shouldn't have to face that news alone," Miranda said softly. Tyson took a deep breath, feeling tightness in his chest. She noticed and touched his arm as she walked her bike to the front door. She took out her keys and let herself in. She leaned her bike against the wall as Tyson entered with his bike and placed it next to hers. "You don't have a garage. Is this where you will keep your bike?" Miranda asked. Tyson felt a bit annoyed by Christy and Miranda telling him what to do, so he just nodded. "For now." He walked quickly to his bedroom to grab a pair of shorts and a t-shirt. Then he went into the bathroom and shut the door. He wanted to wash away the smells from the hospital. The water stung his bruises, and he winced but pushed through, washing himself off. Tyson felt his muscles shaking as he turned off the water and stepped out. He leaned against the counter, trying to catch his breath. After the night before, his lack of sleep, and the ride home, he felt worn out. He tried to pull on his shorts, but dropped them instead. Oops! The bathroom door opened, and Miranda looked in with concern. "Haven't you heard of knocking?" he said, his voice shaky. "You were groaning the whole time in the shower. You look like you are about to fall over. Come on, you have had enough for today. Besides, I have seen you without clothes," she insisted. She moved next to him, put her arm around him, and helped him lean on her shoulder. Miranda led him out of the bathroom and to his bed. "You look very tired, so I want you to rest." Tyson wanted to argue, but knew she was right. "Do you want something for the pain?" she asked as she pulled down the sheets. "No, I am tired of feeling this way," he replied as tiredness quickly caught up with him. He got under the covers slowly, feeling every bruise, and sighed as he rested back on the pillow. His eyes were already closing when he felt a gentle kiss on his forehead. He managed to open his heavy eyelids just enough to see the smiling face of the brunette next to him before drifting back to sleep. Later, she woke him to share some dinner, soup and a piece of bread. Then he slipped back into slumber. When he awoke again, the house was dark, and he felt warmth beside him. He turned to find dark hair spread across the pillow and Miranda's peaceful face as she slept. He quietly got out of bed, trying to hold back the groans from his sore muscles. He tiptoed out of the bedroom and gently closed the door. He walked to the patio doors and looked out at the dark lake. The moonlight barely lit up the edge of his yard where the water began. "The lake doesn't want you." He sighed, recognizing his thoughts were leading him to memories of her. He had questions he wanted to ask, but knew he would only hear what he already knew. Still, he felt compelled to speak. Turning to his right, he saw Imani standing next to him in her nightie. So beautiful. So sad. He looked back at the lake, not wanting to see her sadness when he was the one in pain. "It seems you didn't need me either," he said softly. "I always needed you," Imani replied gently. "But I wasn't enough. I was greedy." Tyson's eyebrows raised in surprise at her answer. He thought about how she enjoyed the attention from the men at her work and realized he could see it as greed. "And I wasn't your type. You wanted someone else," he said, forcing the words out. "I love you," she whispered. "Yet you were with him more than once, something you never did with me," he said sharply. Then he realized something. "Is that why you held back with me?" "Yes," she admitted quietly, her voice heavy with shame. He shook his head, feeling confused. Was she truly ashamed, or was she only sorry she got caught? After all, she had never come clean. He recalled her angry words in the car that night, how she pointed fingers at him for being unfaithful. "Hypocrite," he shot back. "I'm sorry, I was afraid." He was taken aback. Afraid? Where was that coming from? That doesn't make sense. He refused to believe the excuses. "You were so caught up in your work that I felt left behind. I couldn't connect with that side of your life." He knew she sometimes felt overshadowed by his job, but he had tried to reassure her that he didn't expect her to share his passion for math. Their strengths were different, and that was okay. Tyson thought hard about their marriage and examined his actions. Had he been neglectful? He remembered stealing kisses from her while she was getting ready in the morning, their laughter and how she would sometimes push him away. He hadn't done that every morning, and maybe it happened less in the last year of their marriage, but she never mentioned feeling ignored or unhappy. He shook his head. This didn't explain her unfaithfulness. He was just trying to make sense of it. "That's not a good reason for what you did," he said firmly. "I know," she replied, her voice full of regret. He rubbed his eyes, trying to stop his mind from imagining feelings she might have had. That was just wishful thinking, and he refused to lie to himself. "I want you to leave," he said, glancing at Imani, but found Miranda standing there instead. "Oh," he exclaimed. "Can I stay until morning?" she asked softly. "Morning? Oh, I didn't mean you. You can stay." He quickly changed his answer. Miranda frowned, looking closely at him. "Who were you talking to?" He took a breath. He didn't want to drag too many people into his thoughts, but he felt he had no choice. I meant my wife, or rather, my mind, which sometimes brings her image to me for strange conversations like this. Miranda's eyes widened as she looked around the room. You see her now? No, she's gone. I mean, I'm not seeing her anymore. I don't believe in ghosts, he insisted. Miranda shivered and crossed herself. My mother saw her mother for a while after she passed. She gave my mother some good advice. She comes back now and then, but only to my mother. She glanced at Tyson. We believe. He suddenly felt tired again. He didn't want to argue with her. I'm going back to bed. Miranda took his hand and followed him to the bedroom. They both got under the covers and settled in. She turned her back to him but reached for his arm to pull him closer. He felt her warmth against him, and he tried to pull away, but she held him tight. She brought his hand to her face and kissed it gently. This made him feel confused about the situation. He began to wonder how things had escalated so quickly. He knew he wanted to stop this. Once again, he was getting too close to someone much younger than him. Plus, he was still sore from earlier, and her movements were quickening. When she shifted and made things more intense, he started to protest, but before he could say anything, she leaned back and everything changed. Ah, she whispered softly. Sure, here's a revised version of the text that maintains the narrative while simplifying the language and adhering to your guidelines. So good, she sighed. He could only agree with a grunt because it felt so nice. She was close to him, and her strong muscles made him want more. In a sudden move, he turned her over gently. Now he was above her, and this position felt exciting. Yes, harder, she called out, and he tried to give her what she wanted. He felt tired, but he wanted to keep going, and the sound of their bodies filled the room. I'm close, she said, her voice getting higher. He moved faster because he didn't know how much longer he could keep up. The sounds around them grew louder. Do it harder, she encouraged, and her body shook. Feeling overwhelmed, he collapsed beside her when he could no longer continue. She quickly pulled the covers around her and went to the bathroom for a moment. When she returned, she cuddled up next to him under the covers. Soon, she was breathing softly. Sleep didn't come as easily to him. He lay awake, feeling the warmth of her beside him, trying to understand where his life was heading. I like her. He looked up to see Amani sitting at the end of the bed, watching him with her kind but sad eyes. Glancing down at Miranda, he noticed her peacefully resting. He turned back to Amani. You can go now, he whispered. No, not yet, she replied. Feeling a little frustrated, he asked, Why? I can't say, she said with a little frown. His eyebrows shot up in surprise. This was strange behavior for his mind to create. Soon? He asked. She smiled and nodded briefly, and in the next moment, she vanished. Tyson felt a sense of relief from having even a hint of what might happen. A calm washed over him, and he began to look forward to the day ahead. So much could change. With his heart racing and taking deep breaths, Tyson smiled at the girl whose face lit up in the morning light with happiness. Dang, you're getting too good for me, Miranda joked. He laughed as they rode their bikes toward the university. He had come to really enjoy cycling again. What had started as a childhood hobby had become an important part of his exercise routine and his only way to travel between his cottage by the lake and the university. After 6 years of feeling stuck, Tyson's life was finally starting to improve. In the last 10 months, he had begun to reconnect with his old life. The university welcomed him back, and he was given a new office down the hall from George's. True, it was an old storage room that they had fixed up, but his friend was thrilled to have him back. George didn't mind that Tyson's new office was nicer and even had its own bathroom. He was just happy to be back teaching his favorite subject, physics. Instead of getting a parking spot, Tyson had a bicycle locker built because he wouldn't be driving for a while. His PTSD made it hard for him to be in a car without feeling very anxious. He enjoyed biking and rode in any weather. He bought a mountain bike with a rear rack and bag so he could ride to town for groceries. This helped him get healthier and made him feel more independent. Plus, it saved him money on delivery. His racing bike was what he used daily to get to campus. Every day, Miranda met him outside his cottage and raced him to school. It took him months to get better at biking, but now he won more often than not. Although they both loved biking, Miranda no longer shared his living space. She was seeing someone new who treated her much better than her past boyfriends. Tyson was very happy for her. Christy was doing well in New York. He got regular emails from her, and her career was moving forward. She might be traveling soon, since her company was planning to expand into Europe, starting with Paris. Christy was very excited about that. During her last visit, she told him she had started dating someone. This made him feel uneasy, especially since they had just spent a wonderful evening together. She admitted her new boyfriend wasn't as exciting in their relationship. Tyson had asked if she was comparing him to her new partner, and she nodded, looking a bit guilty. They talked for a long time that night and decided to end the physical part of their relationship. Lost in thought, Tyson waved to Miranda as he turned down the lane to his building while she continued biking straight. He put his bike in the locker, changed from his cycling shoes to sneakers, and locked up. As he walked into the building, he greeted the two young women in the admin office. "Good morning, Leona, Felicity." "Good morning, Mr. Kane," they replied together. He paused, raising an eyebrow as he noticed them giggling. "Good morning, Tyson," they greeted him as he had asked before. He nodded with a slight smile and walked down the hall to his office. He peeked into George's office. "Good morning, Gail. Is George still in bed?" he asked playfully. "And how would I know?" she replied with a serious look. Tyson smiled inwardly. He knew Gail had worked with George for many years, and they respected each other's boundaries. Gail valued her privacy, and Tyson had not seen any signs of a romantic relationship in her life. She appeared content without one. Though the idea of being asexual was new to Tyson, he accepted her choice. Still, it was fun to tease his friends. "You handle so much of his life. I just figured you went to his house each morning to make sure he got up. He needs you." "I might agree, but I only help him on campus," she replied with a tired sigh. "Need help?" a voice grumbled from behind Tyson. He turned to see George standing there in a wrinkled suit with tired eyes. Tyson raised his eyebrows. "What happened to you?" "Move out of my way and I might tell you," George said, trying not to look at Tyson's fit build. He felt embarrassed about his own appearance. He preferred it when Tyson was not so fit. Tyson stepped back, and George entered the office, dropping his briefcase on a chair in the waiting area. George yawned. "I was on a video call with colleagues from Russia and Sweden. They had some interesting questions to discuss. We were up all night." "Not very responsible," Gail said with a disapproving look. He rubbed his face tiredly. "I know, but it was really exciting." A spark returned to his tired eyes. "Get some rest. I'll cancel your first class," Gail said with a weary sigh. "See? He needs help." Tyson laughed as he walked to his office, hearing Gail chuckle and George groan. Tyson unlocked his office door, closed it, and walked over to the wardrobe he had installed in his new office. Inside, he kept a week's worth of clothes. He rode his mountain bike to the university on weekends to swap out his clothes for the week ahead and took his dirty laundry home. The wardrobe held 5 dress shirts and 3 pairs of dress pants. The drawer at the bottom contained his undergarments, socks, and 2 pairs of shoes. He never focused much on fashion, so his clothes were quite plain. His shirts were solid colors like white, gray, black, dark blue, and burgundy. The pants were all black but made of stretchy fabric, as his legs had developed to a size that did not fit comfortably in regular pants. Tyson took a pair of underwear from the drawer and headed to the washroom. He quickly changed and got into the shower. He rinsed his cycling clothes, squeezed out the water, and hung them on a small line he had put up in the shower to let them dry. There was no reason to hurry since his first class was at 10. Still, he cleaned himself thoroughly and stepped out right after. He dried off quickly with a towel. After putting on his underwear, he let out a breath of relief. Lately, he had unexpected visitors during his morning routines. Twice that week and twice the week before, Leona and Felicity surprised him with visits. Both mentioned they were single and seemed to be interested in him as the new professor. He had thought about turning them away, but since they weren't in his classes, he let it slide. Leona liked to be playful and often suggested some adventurous ideas, enjoying attention while also having her own preferences. She was cheerful and embraced her femininity, but also had a wild side when it came to fun. Felicity, on the other hand, favored a darker style with her clothes and makeup. She was slim and had a unique look, often leaning into her goth style. She had a strong desire for adventure and wanted someone who would take charge. Today, it seemed like he would have the morning to himself. He smiled subtly, unsure if he was happy or relieved. He applied some deodorant and left the bathroom. He stopped suddenly when he saw a woman with dark hair sitting on the couch against the wall next to his closed door. She wore thick black glasses on her prominent nose and a tweed jacket over a black t-shirt with ripped jeans and black boots. She was looking at her phone, and when she noticed him, she turned it towards him. "Did you just take a picture of me?" he asked quietly, but with a hint of concern. She seemed surprised as well. Then her expression changed when she recognized him. "Tyson? Kane?" He nodded, trying to remember if she was faculty or a student. He frowned because she still hadn't answered his question. "I'm Sydney Calaber from the New Yorker magazine. I had an appointment to interview Professor Kane," she said cautiously. "Yes, that's me, but I wasn't aware of any interview. No one informed me," he replied, mildly frustrated. The woman nodded and smiled. "I have to say, you look quite different from the pictures we found for the story." He sighed. "Is the original story about the train accident?" he asked, sounding tired. She nodded, her smile widening. Tyson wondered what that smile meant. "Who set up the story?" he asked. "The dean's office contacted my editor. It turns out Dean McNally knows my boss," she said. Tyson frowned. Now it made sense. He remembered McNally mentioning something about covering the costs of bringing him back in the office updates. Tyson had naively thought that meant giving a speech, not meeting with a reporter directly. Turning to the wardrobe, he grabbed a pair of pants and put them on, keeping his back to her. "I have a class at 10. "We should finish the interview part before then. Do you mind if I record it?" she said confidently, tapping her phone screen again. Tyson shook his head as he reached for his white shirt but paused. He turned back to her. "Interview part? Dean McNally suggested I watch you teach because your style is different and very effective. I'm excited to see you in action." Tyson snorted. "Action? I'm a math teacher, not a coach." Sydney laughed. "But you don't look like any math teacher I've ever seen. You look like someone who really takes care of themselves." He sighed, then grabbed a black shirt. His students seemed to like that color on him. Buttoning his shirt, he thought about how hard he had worked to get fit after the incident. He noticed her taking another picture and frowned. "I've been focused on exercise since the accident. It took a long time to heal. Then I just kept going." "Can you share what you did to get in shape?" she asked. Tyson sat in his chair, putting on his socks. Realizing he had no way out, he simply nodded. So the interview began. "That's right, Miss DeWitt. Does anyone have questions about how she solved the problem?" Tyson looked from the brunette student to the 23 faces in the classroom. Even Mr. Phillips, who was repeating the class because he had failed last year, seemed relaxed and wore a familiar smirk. Tyson nodded to Miss DeWitt, gesturing for her to return to her seat. She walked back with a bit of confidence, her cheeks flushed. She was retaking the course to improve her grade average. She had passed before but signed up to repeat the class when she heard Tyson would be teaching again. Tyson knew she had a different reason for being back in his class. On her first day, she had asked him to grab coffee and a snack together. There was no doubt about her intentions. He had told her that he would enjoy a coffee, but he couldn't have snacks with students in his class. She looked at him and asked if he could help a student who had passed his course. He replied that this student needed to improve by 10 points compared to her last score. So, yes. She took on the challenge, and as the days went by, it seemed she would do even better than expected. With only 2 weeks left, her enthusiasm was hard to ignore. He appreciated teaching a subject where grades depended only on how well students understood the material. He didn't worry about class participation or other subjective factors. This semester's students were bright and eager to learn. He spoke to the class. "Next week, we have a review, followed by the final exam. I believe we will see some great grades." "Does that mean we can skip review week?" Mr. Phillips joked. He smiled. "I said I'm hopeful, not foolish. See you all next week?" The students laughed and stood as the bell rang. Tyson leaned back against the desk and felt a familiar warmth in his chest. He truly loved teaching. As the students left, his journalist observer approached him from her seat where she had been taking notes. He was sure she had snapped a few more pictures of him, too. "I see it now. You have a special way of teaching that really connects with them." She turned to see Miss DeWitt leave, smiling at Tyson. Some seem more eager than others. She looked at him, curious, but he remained quiet. She sighed. Are you going to tell me you've never thought about accepting their attention? I'm not going to bring any trouble to this place. I would never get involved with a student in my class, and I do my best to kindly steer anyone away from that kind of interest. They are young. I could be their grandfather, he said. Sydney paused and looked at him. Wow, I keep forgetting you're almost 60? He smiled kindly. I am 60. She blinked, then her smile returned. You don't look like any 60-year-old I know. He shrugged. I need to prepare for my next class. Did you get all the information you need for your article? Actually, I was hoping we could continue this interview over dinner. I would like to hear about how your life has changed since the accident, she said with hope in her eyes. I have a rental car so I can drive us to any restaurant you want. My travel budget will cover dinner. His face became serious. I don't travel by car anymore. I ride my bicycle to work. He noticed her interest in that detail and the disappointment in not being able to continue the conversation. While he wasn't eager to discuss his life, he knew he needed to provide a good interview for McNally. Would you like to have dinner at my house tonight? I can share the address with you. I have a prime rib roast cooking. Are you a vegan? She smiled warmly and pointed to her fuller figure. Not a vegan, I enjoy all kinds of food. He smiled back and gave her the address, which she saved on her phone. Sydney looked away from her phone. Do you know where I can find George Haley? Can you tell me what he looks like? His office is just down the hallway from mine. He looks a bit like a smaller version of Einstein, Tyson answered. She laughed softly. I've met him. He directed me to your office this morning. Did he know you would be almost alone? Tyson sighed and nodded. He likes to cause trouble. I was just teasing him about how he struggles without his assistant, Gail. This was his way of getting back at me. Are you friends? She asked. He smiled gently. Yeah, he's my closest friend. Tyson's smile faded as he thought of a woman who once held that place. He shook it off and looked for his notes. I'll see you at 7 tonight? Sydney replied, Yes. Tyson nodded again and motioned for her to leave first. He locked the classroom door and went to the washroom, hoping for a moment of peace without her following him. George looked up when he heard a knock on his door. The journalist from this morning stood there with a smile. He smiled back. You played a clever trick on Tyson today that got me into a funny spot, she said. George chuckled. Glad you found it amusing. She showed she held no hard feelings and walked in, sitting at his desk. It might have started off a bit awkward, but it gave me an interesting angle for my story. My editor will be happy, so thanks. George nodded with a smile. Who is Tyson Kane's best friend? She asked directly. His smile faltered for a moment, then he nodded softly. That would be me these days. It used to be his wife, right? She asked. He gave a slight nod, raising an eyebrow. He sighed, thinking carefully. His first best friend was a woman named Ashley Collins. They were neighbors and very close until he went to Europe for school. While he was away, she married the dean of the university, Franklin Dunnings. It was Ashley who helped get Tyson his job here. He took a breath, knowing he needed to continue carefully. One night at Franklin's retirement party, Ashley's marriage ended badly. After the incident, she disappeared and went to Europe. We haven't heard from her since. George could see the reporter processing the information. Finally, she spoke. Childhood friend and wife. Are they friends or rivals? He frowned. I'm not going to guess about that, and I really think you should avoid asking Tyson. The woman looked at him, then nodded. She quickly stood up. Thanks again for your help this morning. George nodded at her and watched her leave, feeling a bit uneasy in his stomach. He thought about where this story was headed and hoped the dean would review it before it was published. For Tyson's sake. Sydney had a lot of great material for an interesting story. Tyson's change from a chubby guy before the accident to a fit man afterward, along with his impressive teaching skills, made for engaging reading. She needed more background on what he was like before the accident and his friendship with his old best friend. She paused to talk to the two women at the small office. Hi, I'm Sydney Calabro from the New Yorker magazine. I'm working on a story about Tyson Kane. The women perked up with big smiles. They clearly admired him, judging by the dreamy expressions on their faces. I've spoken to George Haley, but I want to find a few more people who know how Tyson was before the accident. The two women exchanged looks, and the one with a ponytail seemed to have a great idea. She turned to her coworker. Mrs. Cromwell. The young woman with highlights nodded eagerly. The ponytail girl said Mrs. Cromwell was the head of human resources for years, and now she is in the library. She knows everything. Thanks, Sydney replied, and waved as she left the office. Now she had a lead to follow. After his last class, Tyson hurried back to his office to change into his cycling outfit. He was meeting Miranda by the east gate of the campus. She had texted him earlier saying she had a surprise for their ride. They had started going on longer rides through the nearby country roads after school. As he opened the bathroom door, he saw Felicity standing there with a worried look. Felicity? What's wrong? He asked. That writer from the magazine? The one working on your story? She asked, and he nodded. She was asking for the name of someone who worked with you before the accident. She took a deep breath. We told her about Mrs. Cromwell. Tyson closed his eyes and rubbed the bridge of his nose. One of my contacts told me she overheard them talking about Devin Wilson in the library. Felicity looked very upset. Tyson clenched his jaw at the mention of that name. He only truly disliked one person, and that was Devin. He had crossed a line that was important to Tyson. Tyson had received some support from Imani, but his thoughts grew heavy as he tried to focus. Suddenly he felt Felicity hugging him tightly. I'm so sorry, she whispered, her eyes wide with regret. Tyson looked down, seeing her sincerity in her expression. He returned her embrace, feeling a quiet bond between them. He gave her a reassuring smile, and they shared a moment, a close, comforting hug. Felicity looked up at him, seeming grateful for the quiet connection. Tyson held her gaze, then gently let go, noticing the clock nearby. Oh no, I'm going to be late, he exclaimed, realizing he needed to leave right away. Quickly helping Felicity back to her feet, he pulled himself together and gave her a light, friendly smile. She returned the smile, looking a little happier. Tyson glanced back as he hurried out, saying, Thank you, you were wonderful. Could I ask you to lock up on your way out? The office workers had keys, so he felt sure it would be taken care of. Felicity nodded, smiling slightly. He wondered what made her so happy, but decided to focus on his task. He nodded back and put on his shoes. He headed out the door and hurried down the hall. He paused briefly at George's office entrance, where he saw Gail. When they spotted him, both stopped talking. Have a good night, he called out as he rushed away. He thought he heard Gail respond, but he knew he was running late. Checking his phone, he saw a message from Miranda. Heading east on HYY 18. Catch up. He saw that she had just left. If he pushed himself, he could still reach her. He ran to the bike locker and unlocked it. Professor Kane? He turned to see Miss DeWitt standing nearby with her books. Her eyes were wide as she looked at him. He felt the pressure of time, so he focused on the locker while quickly taking off his shoes. Yes? He switched to his cycling shoes as he placed his sneakers in the locker, but she had not spoken yet. Looking back at her, he tightened his shoes. I'm really late. Is there something you need, or can it wait until Monday? He asked. He noticed she was biting her lip, but her expression was different. She seemed nervous as she looked at him. Monday? She replied softly. He nodded. Great. I will see you then. He rolled his bike out, locked the locker, and gave his bike a quick check. Time to go. With a final smile at the young woman, he hopped on his bike and took off. He rode through town to the start of Highway 18 and jumped out of the saddle to push hard on the pedals. He wanted to catch up to Miranda before the first big hill. Otherwise, he might lose her on the way down. Tyson wasn't sure how fast he was going, but it felt like he was flying as the scenery rushed past. He loved his Cannondale. Its firm frame made every pedal stroke powerful and effective. He felt quick and light as he rode at this pace. Although he was strong, cycling made him feel graceful, as if he was moving in perfect harmony with his bike. As he approached the climb, he spotted Miranda ahead, 2/3 of the way up. The incline wasn't too steep, but it was long, and he knew he needed to make his move. If he couldn't catch her in that last stretch, she would win. He smiled to himself, thinking, not today. Using the slight downhill just before the climb, he gained speed and launched himself up the hill. He managed the gears smoothly to keep his pace strong as he reached the top of the hill. He raised his fist in the air, celebrating like he had won a big cycling race. He came to a stop at a small area next to the guardrail. Suddenly, he noticed several people watching him and gave a shy smile. 5 other cyclists, 3 men and 2 women were there in bright jerseys, each standing beside their fancy bikes, wearing strange smiles. Miranda pulled up next to him and rolled her eyes. She reached into her back pocket and handed him a tissue. "You've got some black lipstick on your lips. Was that Felicity? Is that why you were late?" He was surprised by the snap in her voice as he wiped his lips. Looking at the tissue, he saw a lot of lipstick on it. He looked back at Miranda. "I'm sorry for the delay, but I came as fast as I could." He slipped the tissue into his pocket. She let out a frustrated sigh and took another tissue to try to clean the mark from his chin. One of the male cyclists joked, "If you follow that trail of kisses down, where does it lead?" A young woman next to him playfully nudged him while the others laughed. Tyson took Miranda's hand gently, but noticed she pulled away, leaving him with the new tissue. He absent-mindedly wiped his chin, waiting for her to say something. "I think Professor Kane can wipe his own face, Miranda," the nearest male cyclist said, glancing between them. Tyson turned to the other cyclists. "Is this the surprise you mentioned?" he asked, to lighten the mood. The young man extended a hand. "Hi, I'm Ken Drake, Miranda's boyfriend." "Ah," Tyson thought. He smiled and shook his hand. "Nice to meet you. Miranda told me about you. Congratulations." Ken nodded, but he still looked a bit worried about his girlfriend. One of the other couples rolled a bit closer. The jokester said, "I'm Tim, and this is my partner, Penny." Tyson smiled and nodded at them. The last 2 looked eager to move. "David and Riley," the last man said. "We're running out of daylight." Tyson nodded and motioned for them to go ahead. The path was clear, so they all started riding again. Tyson still needed to hear what Miranda wanted to say. The other side of the hill had a winding downhill, which wasn't Tyson's strength, so he took it slow while the others sped down, clearly experienced. Once they reached the valley, he had to speed up to catch up with them. When he took off, Tyson's strong legs helped him pull ahead on the flat stretches and curves of the valley. He soon left the others far behind. At the intersection of Highway 18 and County Road 10, there was a rest stop. It had a small gas station and snack shop where all the cyclists could relax. Tyson grabbed a bag of mixed nuts and dried fruit, then filled his water bottle at a spring water tap. Tim approached, hands on his hips and a big smile on his face. "I was a bit worried you'd slow us down on that downhill, but wow, I couldn't keep up with you on the flat parts. How did you get so strong and fast?" Tyson laughed. "Yeah, I'm not great at going down hills. I do much better on flat roads and climbs." He thought for a moment. "If it were a straight downhill, I might do okay." He shrugged. "I do strength training and swim every day." "Didn't you get hurt badly in that train accident?" David asked bluntly, and Riley shot him an annoyed look. "What? It's true," David replied. Tyson nodded slowly. "Yeah, I have a lot of titanium pins and screws in me. They'd probably stop me at airport security." "So, how do you do it?" David pressed, not wanting to accept his loss to an older guy. Tyson took a deep breath and concentrated on David's frustrated face. "I had to rebuild myself after the accident. The physical therapy was really tough and felt never-ending, but I didn't give up. I had to learn how to walk all over again, and my doctor said no high-impact exercises. It was my friend Miranda who got me back into cycling. This bike is a gift from another friend." Miranda smiled at him but then looked away when Ken glanced her way. Tyson felt uneasy about being around them. "When I left the hospital, I started swimming in the lake near my home. Every day I swam out until I couldn't." He cleared his throat, knowing he couldn't share everything about his challenges with the lake. "Anyway, I believe my swimming helped my stamina and lung capacity." He looked directly at David. "I don't back down when it hurts. I push through. It's how I handle things." He shrugged. This seemed to calm David down. He walked back to his bicycle. "Who's Felicity?" Penny asked with a playful smile. Tyson just smiled back and shook his head, which made her pout. "If you don't mind me asking, how old are you?" Riley asked carefully. "Not at all. I just turned 60. Riley smiled. "So there's hope for us if we keep exercising. Exercise is the key to staying young." "I believe it's definitely important," Tyson agreed. Eating healthy is also a big part of it. Make sure your body gets the food and energy it needs to work well, but no more than that. What happens next is up to your genes, and honestly, that's a puzzle to me. This made everyone laugh a bit. They continued their ride, and Tyson was really enjoying his first time riding with a group. At their second and last break, they stopped at a small park where County Road 10 meets Highway 23, which would take them back to town. Here, Tyson learned a bit about the others. They were from the bike club that Miranda had tried to join before. When Ken and the others were unable to convince the club leaders to accept Miranda a second time, they chose to leave the club and join her instead. They were getting tired of the club's strict rules. It wasn't fun anymore. Tyson understood how they felt. He was having a great time on the ride. Highway 23 had a nice, wide paved section along the side, so even though it was a busy road, they could stay away from the cars. As they got closer to town, David and Riley waved and headed off to their home. Soon after, Tim and Penny rode away, waving goodbye as well. Before Ken and Miranda left, Tyson wanted to say something. Could we pause for a moment? Ken nodded, and they stopped in a gas station parking lot. Tyson turned to Miranda. I really enjoyed the surprise of riding with a group, so thank you for that. Both Ken and Miranda nodded back, but they remained quiet as if sensing he had more to say. I can see there's some tension because of my presence. I don't want to cause any problems between you two. I won't join your group. No, you should join, Miranda exclaimed. Ken looked between them. Is there something you want to tell me? He asked her. Miranda looked at him nervously. What? Why did you look upset when he arrived with lipstick on his face? I'd like to know, Ken asked. Tyson was worried about this too. It seemed like Miranda hadn't told her new boyfriend about their past relationship, but that side of their relationship had ended months ago. Miranda's face showed she was uncomfortable. Tyson sighed. This might complicate things further, but they needed to be honest. Miranda and I are just friends, now. Ken focused on him. Now? Tyson nodded. We met last year, and as I said, it was her idea to get me cycling. It helped me a lot when I was feeling down. We went through a lot together and were close for a time. We both knew this wouldn't turn into anything long-term. When she told me she was interested in someone else, we decided to end our physical relationship, but stayed friends. He glanced at Miranda, who looked guilty. That's my side. Miranda, would you like to add something? She looked at him, her cheeks slightly pink and her eyes glistening. She cleared her throat as Ken and Tyson waited for her response. My reaction today surprised me as well, she said softly. I had never seen any sign that Tyson was with someone else before. I know in my head that we aren't in that type of relationship anymore, but my heart was not ready to let go. Tyson raised his eyebrows while Ken frowned. Do you love him? Why did you start a relationship with me? Were you just pretending? He asked sharply. No, I'm not pretending. I really like you and I want to see where our relationship can go, she said passionately. She turned to Tyson. I'm sorry. It's hard to stop feeling for someone you've been close to. I'm still learning how to handle this. There's no guidebook. Tyson nodded. I understand. I'm sorry too. I should have been stronger. I don't want to ruin what could be a nice relationship for both of you. You make a great couple. Talk it out. Be honest and kind with each other. If things work out and you still want me in the cycling group, just let me know. Thanks for the ride tonight. I had a lot of fun. He reached out his hand to Ken with a friendly smile, and Ken shook it after a moment. He simply nodded to Miranda, sensing she needed some space. He rode away, enjoying the last part of his journey. Checking the time, he realized he still had an hour before his guest would arrive. He felt a sense of relief. Then he remembered what Felicity had told him about Sydney asking Mrs. Cromwell questions. Mrs. Cromwell had stayed late at the party, and she was known for spreading rumors. Suddenly, he was less excited about his evening. The small prime rib roast smelled amazing, and once he took it out of the oven, it looked just as good as it smelled. The roast potatoes had a crispy, golden brown crust, and the baby carrots were soft. He figured there was just enough for two, so he didn't have to rush to add more food to the plate. A basket of fresh rolls and butter was ready on the table. He double-checked that he had fresh strawberries, angel food cake, and whipped cream for dessert. The crunch of gravel in his driveway signaled that his guest had arrived. He walked to the door and opened it to see Sydney closing the door of her rental car. She walked around to him with a smile. She had changed into a sundress. It was a cheerful yellow with wide orange stripes across it. One of the stripes ran across her chest. She was a bit round in the middle, where the second stripe stretched, and the final line wrapped around her hips, slightly bending. She wore tan sandals with straps that reached her ankles and held a bottle of red wine in her right hand. "You look great tonight," Tyson exclaimed with a smile. "You didn't have to bring wine." She climbed up the stairs and offered him the bottle. "Never show up empty-handed," she said with a smile. He noticed the drink was cold. "Come in, please," he said, stepping aside to let her in. She took a look around. "Your home is beautiful. It's bigger than I expected. Is it a 2-bedroom?" she asked, amazed. "Thank you. Yes, it is," he replied. "How did you get such a nice house by the lake?" she asked curiously. "I inherited it from my parents," he said simply. "Dinner is ready." Her smile grew wider. "It smells amazing. It's prime rib. Would you like some hot mustard or steak sauce?" he offered. "How do you enjoy it?" she asked. "Au jus," he answered. She smiled and nodded. "I'll have the same." Tyson showed her to a seat and then filled 2 plates, bringing them to the table. "Oh, wow, this smells incredible. Where did you learn to cook?" she asked. "I was an only child and both my parents worked. My mom taught me how to cook to help out. It really helped me when I studied in England. None of my classmates could cook, so I made meals for everyone," he explained. "Everyone?" she asked with a raised eyebrow. He chuckled a bit shyly. "We just called our group that. It looked like an old military building, and we mathematicians liked the idea of it." He opened the bottle of wine and poured it for them. They took their first bites and smiled as the tender roast melted in their mouths. "Would you mind if I asked about your early years after you came back?" Sydney needed to know. He thought for a moment, then looked at her. "I might answer, but you can ask anything." They both sipped the wine, finding it went well with the meal. Sydney began. "When you got back from Europe, you found out your best friend Ashley Collins had gotten married. Were you two ever close?" He met her gaze. "Well, we're jumping into sensitive topics now." She simply smiled back at him. He sighed. "No, it never happened." "But you would have been open to it," she added. Tyson looked thoughtful. "It's not a question that matters now. There was no chance then. I got back and she was married. I met Amani and fell in love. We got married. More than 20 years passed before Ashley's marriage ended. Amani's accident changed everything. I learned in the hospital that Ashley had moved away. It's in the past. We both got new beginnings." Sydney changed her approach for a moment, asking lighter questions about his childhood, fun memories, and how he grew up with Ashley. They enjoyed their meal while the conversation flowed. Finally, Sydney glanced around the room at the pictures. "I see your wife in some of these photos. She was very pretty." Tyson just nodded and kept eating. "I don't recognize the young blonde in the pictures," she said, pointing to the photos of Christy. He glanced at them and then back at his plate. "That's Christy Taylor, a friend. She helped me come out of my shell a bit. Another friend, Miranda Moreno, suggested I start cycling to get around. Christy bought the bike I use for campus." He smiled, remembering the playful argument they had about him paying for it. She was such a determined young woman. He noticed Sydney looked at him with an understanding expression. "What about you? Anyone special in your life?" he asked, trying to shift the topic, and he saw her smile broaden. "Yes, I'm married. It's been 3 years now. Her name is Phoebe. She's a nurse." She held his gaze firmly. "A nurse in New York City? That must be a hard job," he said. And she nodded, pleased that he was open-minded. "It's nice to see a young person like you with a good attitude," she said. Tyson laughed. "Glad someone thinks so." She chuckled. "You have to really look to see signs of age. Whatever you're doing to stay youthful, keep it up and share it with others. You'll do well." He shrugged, using a dinner roll to wipe his plate clean. "I have enough money for my needs. I live simply, so my expenses are low." He looked at Sydney. "For dessert, I have fresh strawberries, angel food cake, and whipped cream." She nodded with excitement, so he cleared their plates and brought the dessert to the table. They served themselves and enjoyed the sweet treat. Afterward, Tyson took the dishes away while Sydney settled on the couch with a glass of wine. He joined her with his own glass, and they turned slightly on the sofa to face each other. Sydney gave him a gentle smile. "You seem ready for this next question, Devin Wilson?" Tyson clenched his jaw without realizing it. She noticed and spoke softly. "You don't like him?" Tyson scoffed at her mild words. "No, I don't like him at all. I despise him and what he did. The affair he had with Imani is shameful, but I want him to be known for his true actions." "You pressed charges?" Sydney asked. Tyson nodded. "I don't expect much from the legal system since all I have is his confession. Imani never mentioned the affair to me." A sudden memory flashed in his mind Imani's eyes just before the train hit. The look in her eyes was filled with guilt, but he understood that he was viewing it through his current feelings. Still, the memory tensed his body. "Tyson? Are you okay?" Sydney's worried voice broke through the noise in his head. He opened his eyes to see her leaning over him. He felt his muscles shaking and tried to relax. "Yes, sorry." "What happened?" she asked as she sat down next to him on the couch. "I had a moment, a flashback about the accident. It was the last time I talked to Imani. We were arguing about Ashley. She thought I liked her." "Wow, that's rich coming from her," Sydney said. Tyson gave her a serious look. "Sorry," she added, looking a bit embarrassed. When Tyson felt steadier, he nodded. "I was upset and confronted her about how she acted around Devin. This was just before the accident." He hadn't meant to say all that, but the words came out. "Oh no, I'm really sorry," Sydney said quietly, clearly affected by what he shared. "Do you have enough for your article? Would you mind if we wrapped up for the night?" "I'm feeling tired," Tyson asked. He wanted to stop talking. Sure, I have enough," she replied. Tyson stood and walked Sydney to the door. She turned and hugged him tightly. "You're a good man, Tyson, just my opinion, but you didn't deserve any of this," she said. He hugged her back. "Thank you. Stay safe out there." With one last look, she nodded and left. He watched her drive away before locking the door and collecting the empty wine glasses to take to the kitchen. As he washed the dishes and tidied up, he lost himself in the routine. When he finished, he noticed there was still half a bottle of wine, so he poured another glass. He turned off the lights and sat on the couch, watching the flames flicker in the small wood stove. He took a sip of wine and tried to clear his mind, focusing only on the fire. "I hurt you," he sighed as her voice echoed in his head. "Yes." He felt too tired to ignore the memories tonight. "That was never my plan." The flames danced, and he found a calmness in watching them. It felt safer than the voices. "It doesn't matter what you intended. You took away everything good from me," he said wearily. "No, you're stronger than before." He frowned at the memory of Imani sitting across from him, beautiful and unreachable. "It's too bad you weren't here to see this," he pointed at himself. She turned away, and a tear fell down her cheek. Tyson suddenly stood up and marched outside, feeling restless. He walked down to the sand in the backyard and stared out at the still waters. The sun had just set, but there was still enough light around. Looking up, he noticed the clear night sky, no clouds in sight. The air was calm tonight. Taking a deep breath, he let the quiet in and felt his mind clear up. His thoughts were getting a bit heavy and he felt emotional. "I'm sorry," he said. "Please don't keep saying that," he replied quietly. He looked over and saw Imani standing nearby, her hands clasped together. She looked both lovely and sad. He turned towards her. "I don't want to hold on to anger about you. I loved you. Yes, there was betrayal, but being angry won't help now. I just need you to go. It's been 7 years. Please leave." "I can't. Not yet." He turned back to the water. "Ugh. The lake isn't calling for you." "I know, I don't need to hear it again," he said, feeling tired, and when he looked back, she had disappeared. He was alone. He realized he was struggling to ignore these visions. He worried that his thoughts were getting out of control. He hoped that wasn't the case. It would be hard to go through all this pain to get back to normal life and then start losing it now. For Tyson, the month after Sydney's interview settled into his usual routines as the year came to a close. The final exams passed, and his students did well. Miss DeWitt raised her score by 22 points and was thrilled with her perfect grade. She was celebrating her graduation with 2 weeks in France, but she promised to visit Tyson for a treat when she returned. Miranda sent him an email to apologize, saying that she would need some time to focus on her relationship with Ken, who felt a bit uneasy about her friendship with Tyson. He replied that he understood. Although he would miss riding with her, her relationship was more important. One weekend, while riding alone on the same route where he met Ken and his friends, Tyson came across the town's cycling club. About 18 cyclists, mostly young men, caught up to him as they began the descent, hoping to leave him behind. He pushed ahead, weaving through the group. Some followed closely for a bit, but he managed to pull away, leaving them one by one until only one cyclist remained with him as they reached the small gas station parking lot. The young man was too tired to say anything, so Tyson went inside to grab a small bag of dried fruit and nuts. When he came back outside to refill his water bottle, the group was slowly arriving. He smiled at the cyclists who were watching him enjoy his snack. One of the young men, the first to fall behind in the valley, came up to him. "I'm Peter Hamlin, president of this cycling club. You really surprised us. None of us expected you to be that fast, and we certainly didn't think you could keep that pace for so long. Did you pass all of us?" "Tyson Kane. One of you managed to keep up with me." Tyson looked around and pointed to the man resting in the shade of a tree. "That guy. He was pretty determined." He noticed Peter's face turning red and raised an eyebrow in curiosity. "Tyson Kane? The professor? You're older than I thought," Peter shouted, and the rest of the group turned to stare. Tyson smiled at the man's reaction. "And?" "Forget it. I was going to ask you to join our club," Peter replied sharply. "So, you liked my biking skills, but now that you know how old I am, you don't want me?" Ken was right. This club is silly. Tyson shrugged and walked back to his bike, where he filled his water bottle at the spring. He got on the bike, waved, and pedaled away from the parking lot. He really enjoyed being able to ride his bike. He had no plans to go back to driving a car. With no weekend trips to make to the university during the summer break, he had extra time for personal rides. He was thinking about doing some bike camping this summer. He had time to spare. As he passed the hospital, he smiled at the news that Devin Wilson no longer worked there. Being accused of assaulting one of the hospital's most liked administrators brought out the anger of many staff members who had faced harassment from the old chief surgeon. More charges followed, and for once, the hospital's leaders chose not to protect him. He was let go and probably wouldn't find another job in a hospital. Tyson stopped for ice cream and remembered his first ride with Miranda, smiling at the thought. She and Christy had brought him out of his shell. He hadn't tried to change things by himself. He had fallen into a routine, and without their help, he might still be stuck there. He rode home slowly, trying to enjoy the day. He had no plans. Maybe he would cook on the grill for dinner. He would have invited George, but his friend was in Austria visiting others. That was the extent of Tyson's social life, just one friend. That felt a bit sad. His neighbor, Barbara Willoughby, was away visiting one of her children. He thought about Christy, who was living her dream in New York City. Miranda and her partner were on a road trip around the country. Even Leona and Felicity were gone for the summer. He wasn't sure if they would return in the fall. Tyson started to feel a bit down. He had spent 5 years by himself, and it hadn't really bothered him then. But now, he felt a growing need for others. He realized he truly missed Imani, even the memory of her. She hadn't shown up in his thoughts since eating with the journalist. He wished he could talk to the real Imani, not just the version in his mind. He worried that her distance meant she was unhappy with him, and he wanted to understand why. There was still no sign of the article Sydney had written. He was starting to dread it being published and wasn't even sure if he would read it. If anything, he would ask George and Gail to read it and tell him what they thought. As he reached the end of his driveway and got off his bike, he noticed a small red Fiat 500 parked nearby. Sitting on his steps was Miss DeWitt. She hadn't seen him yet because she was busy typing a message on her phone. Tyson felt a flutter of excitement. It was Miss DeWitt. But a wave of sadness also washed over him. He knew why she was here. His heart was saying no. It was saying no to a casual relationship with Miss DeWitt. It was saying no to Leona and Felicity if they came back. He wanted to avoid more meaningless encounters with people who would leave him with regrets. With the loss of Imani, his plans for life had changed too. Now, he had to start over, but that wouldn't happen if he was moving from one person to another without feeling real connections. Taking a deep breath to calm himself, he walked toward the steps. When she heard footsteps on the gravel, she looked up and smiled. But her smile faded when she saw the expression on his face. "You promised," she said, her voice a bit sad. He paused a few feet from her. "I know, I'm sorry. I just can't do this anymore." Her eyes widened in surprise. "You can't?" He blinked, then chuckled lightly. "No, it's not about that. It's my feelings." She gasped, concerned. "No, there's nothing wrong with me. It's emotional. I can't keep having brief encounters just for excitement. People forget how old I am. I was supposed to be retiring and enjoying my later years. With a life partner." He held her gaze. "And that's not really your plan." She shook her head in disappointment. "You have a wonderful future ahead, full of opportunities and fun. I'm just not going to be part of that. I lost the person I wanted to settle down with to enjoy this time of life. Now I have to find a new path. I'm sorry for breaking my promise." She stepped forward for a hug, and he embraced her back. "I can't say I'm not disappointed, but I understand," she said softly. When they separated, the young woman turned toward her car but stopped suddenly. Both she and Tyson noticed a woman standing at the edge of the driveway, watching them cautiously. She was blushing and clasping her hands together. "I think I might know someone who would like to share those later years with you." Tyson felt a rush of emotions. He was scared that if he took a breath, this moment would vanish, just like Imani had. Her wavy, sun-kissed blonde hair fell down past her shoulders. Her face was familiar but showed signs of having grown with time and the outdoors. Freckles danced across her cheeks and nose, telling stories of sunny days. Her warm skin was proof of that. She wore a pretty sundress and sandals on her feet. Her arms were strong and tan, showing that she had spent a lot of time outside doing hard work. "Ash? Ashley? Oh my God," Tyson finally managed to say, stepping closer and closer until he saw her moving toward him. He hurried forward to lift her up in his arms, holding her tight, feeling her solid presence and warmth. "Tyson, too tight," she protested softly. He quickly set her down, trying to meet her gaze, but his eyes wouldn't cooperate. He wiped at them, but everything stayed blurry, and he realized his cheeks felt wet. "I'm crying!" he exclaimed in shock. A warm, emotional voice chuckled back. "So am I." "Ashley, you're really here?" He quickly lifted his shirt over his head to dry his eyes. "Oof, you've certainly changed since I last saw you," Ashley remarked, her voice filled with warmth. Suddenly, Stephanie, who had been there, let out a sound of disappointment. When Tyson blinked to clear his vision, he saw Ashley standing before him. She had aged, but she was still incredibly beautiful. He then turned to Stephanie, who had a pout on her face. "Stephanie, I want you to meet Ashley Dunnings." "Collins," Ashley corrected gently. Tyson nodded in apology. "Sorry, Ashley Collins, my best friend. This is Stephanie DeWitt, a former student of mine." "And someone who was interested?" Ashley asked with a playful grin. "I was this close," Stephanie said, showing a tiny space between her fingers. Then she lightly ran her fingers down Tyson's chest. "Food for dreams." She smiled at Ashley. "Nice to meet you, Ashley. Enjoy your time." Her tone showed she meant it kindly. After that, Stephanie climbed into her sporty little car and Tyson and Ashley moved to the steps. With a quick honk, Stephanie drove away. Tyson watched her leave, then looked back at Ashley, puzzled. "How did you get here?" Ashley gave him a shy smile. "I actually drove here in a rental and followed her. When she parked here, I went past and parked next door. I was waiting in my car watching her and saw her sit on the steps while I was waiting for you. When you arrived, I stepped out of my car and hid behind some bushes to listen. I wasn't sure if you had a new girlfriend." "I don't have anyone." "Well, George Haley is still my friend," he said, looking at her with excitement. She was back. "Should I move my car?" she asked. "Oh, if you want, but Barbara won't be back for a week," he replied cheerfully. "Later then? Should we go inside?" Ashley asked, smiling at his joyful expression. "Of course. Where are my manners? Please come in," Tyson said, suddenly remembering. He rushed up the stairs and unlocked the door for her. When she walked in, he hurried down, brought his bike up and placed it next to the door. "Can I get you something to drink?" he asked. "Water would be lovely," she replied, settling onto the sofa and glancing around. Tyson quickly went to the kitchen and came back with a glass of water. He handed it to her, saying, "I can't believe you're here. This is such incredible timing." He sat beside her. "I thought you might never want to see me again. What I did that night felt terrible," she admitted, shaking her head with sadness. "I went to stay with my aunt in Tuscany. She helped me through a difficult time. I was so ashamed and kept myself away from everyone." Tyson gently squeezed her hand. "Ashley, there was nothing to forgive. I understood what you were going through, and I cared for you. But I was with someone else, too." Ashley nodded. "I'm really sorry I wasn't there for you after she passed away. I found out only after Miss Caliber visited my aunt." "Sydney Caliber? The journalist?" Tyson asked, surprised. Ashley nodded again. "She said her editor sent her to find me for a story. She's a great investigator. The link between my family and my aunts is hard to find. She told me everything that happened here after I left. I cried a lot that night. I felt like I let my best friend down again." Tyson lifted her hand and kissed it. "You never let me down. I missed you so much, but I understood you needed to leave the place that hurt you." Tears filled her beautiful blue eyes. "I never wanted to leave you. I thought it was best to protect your marriage. I didn't realize you were actually alone. Did you mean what you said in the driveway? Will you share my life with me?" She began to cry tears of joy. "Yes, Tyson, yes!" Ashley's words were full of joy. They shared a kiss, only the second one in their lives, but now they fully crossed the line from friends to something more, feeling it was even better than they had imagined. She ran her fingers through his hair, and he gently held her face, kissing her deeply and warmly. Ashley closed her eyes, recalling the brief, forbidden kiss they had shared years before. Back then he had pulled away, but now he was fully present, and there was no hesitation between them. He carefully lifted her into his arms, carrying her into his room, and gently laid her on the bed. He joined her there, continuing to kiss her, exploring her soft lips and holding her close. For Tyson, this was how it should have been when he came back from Europe. During his time away, he realized how much he missed her and how important she was to him. But when he returned and learned that she had married, it struck him that he had taken her for granted. "I'm sorry," he said suddenly. "What?" Ashley looked at him, surprised. "I left for Europe and didn't tell you how I felt about you. I thought there would always be time, and I didn't think about how you might feel. I was selfish," he admitted, regret in his voice. "Shh," she soothed. "We were young and didn't know any better. I was afraid of how smart you were, and that fear led me to someone I felt I could guide. I told myself that was enough." She sighed, adding, "But I was happy for you when you found love. I loved her, but it didn't work out. Maybe I didn't give her enough attention, or maybe I was too focused on myself," Tyson said, his voice quiet. "If she didn't talk to you about it, you couldn't have known," Ashley reassured him. Tyson kissed her again, and they both smiled, resting their foreheads together, catching their breath. "I've missed you so much, Ashley. I love you," he said, his voice full of emotion. "I love you too. I think I always have," she replied softly. Tyson laughed gently. "Why are men so clueless? We don't see what's right in front of us." "Well, do you see me now?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes, I do. Ashley Collins, I promise my heart will always be yours. Will you promise me the same?" "With all my heart," she replied, her eyes glistening with happy tears. "Marry me," Tyson said, his voice full of hope. "Yes," she cried, and they kissed again, holding on to each other as if they would never let go. As they pulled back, both of them were smiling and filled with joy. "So, are we going to spend all night talking, or are we going to move forward with our new beginning?" she asked with a playful grin. Tyson laughed, pulling her close, and together they began a new chapter, filled with love and promises for the future. Tyson paused, taking in the sight of Ashley, struck by how youthful and vibrant she looked. Whatever she had been doing at the vineyard had clearly kept her in great shape. "You're beautiful," he said, his admiration clear. She smiled, lightly teasing. "Not as stunning as that young blonde in the photos in your living room?" He chuckled, realizing she must have noticed the pictures of Christy. You mean the one who could pass for you in your 20s? Exactly, she replied, pretending to pout. Tyson laughed, recognizing the familiar expression. That's Christy Taylor, a good friend. She was a student of mine, but also someone who helped me get out of my comfort zone. She encouraged me to embrace life again. He looked at Ashley with warmth. You're everything I imagined, and more. Before she could respond, he pulled her close and kissed her gently. They shared a deep connection, one he hadn't felt in years, and Ashley's eyes sparkled with happiness. Ashley brushed her fingers over his chest, looking at him thoughtfully. I'm still amazed by how fit you are. That woman today was right. I'm lucky to have you, she said with a playful smile. Let me show you just how lucky, Tyson replied, lifting her effortlessly and settling her on the bed. She laughed at his energy, her heart full as they shared another kiss, feeling closer than ever before. They both relaxed, basking in the moment and feeling grateful for each other. Ashley closed her eyes, feeling her heart soar, enjoying the simple warmth of being with him. Tyson, thank you, she whispered, overwhelmed by the happiness they'd found. Tyson held her hand, knowing this was a moment he wanted to hold on to forever. Ashley felt a surge of joy welling up, her heart full as she held Tyson close. She was overwhelmed by how deeply she cared for him and how much this moment meant. She felt a tear slip down her cheek, grateful for the happiness he was bringing into her life. Tyson looked into her eyes, sharing her joy. He gently held her, and they both enjoyed the warmth of simply being together, the connection between them feeling new and wonderful. Was that something new? Tyson asked softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. She nodded, smiling. Yes, I've never felt this way before, she admitted quietly. Tyson grinned warmly. Well, that's a shame because I love sharing moments like this. Get ready for plenty more, he said with a playful smile. Her eyes sparkled at the thought and she laughed softly. I'll gladly take you up on that. I'd love to return the favor, but I think I'm a bit out of practice, she teased, feeling relaxed and happy. Practice makes perfect, Tyson chuckled, and she gave him a grin. Then consider me your best student, she said with a wink. They shared a quiet laugh, feeling close and deeply at ease. Ashley reached out, taking his hand. I feel like I've waited my whole life to feel this way, she murmured. Tyson leaned in, their foreheads touching as he held her close. It feels like a dream, he whispered. She smiled up at him, feeling safe and loved. They lay together, enjoying the closeness and warmth between them, both feeling that this was exactly where they were meant to be. Tyson held her, gazing into her eyes, feeling a deep sense of peace. I love you, Ashley, he said, his voice full of emotion. She reached up, resting her hand on his cheek. I love you too, Tyson, she replied softly, her blue eyes filled with warmth. They shared a gentle, heartfelt kiss, both lost in the happiness they had found together. They held each other, content in the silence, feeling they had finally found what they had been searching for. Tyson felt a change in himself, but he stayed close to Ashley. Neither of them wanted that moment to finish. That's how they drifted off to sleep. In the early morning, Tyson woke up on his back with Ashley snuggled against him. It felt comfortable and right. He looked down at Imani at the foot of the bed and she smiled at him. He glanced at Ashley to see if she was still asleep, then turned back to Imani with hope. Now? He asked softly. She nodded. Goodbye, my love. And then she was gone, but this time it felt final. Tyson felt lighter than he had in years. A weight inside him was lifted, and he felt like he could float away. But he wouldn't, because Ashley's love was the solid ground he needed. Devin Wilson rolled down the window of his Porsche Carrera as he sped along the Pacific Coast Highway. Furious, he threw an empty rum bottle out the window to hear it crash against the rocks below. Next to him was a copy of a magazine. Someone from his old hospital had sent it to him because it featured an article about Tyson Cain. Seeing the headline made him choke with anger. The man who revives excitement in math. Devin had to hide away in California while Tyson was celebrated everywhere. Where was the fairness in that? First, he took away the person Devin loved most. Then he worked hard to change his body, enjoying attention from many women. Now he was even marrying his childhood sweetheart, with fancy guests at their wedding. The images of Tyson made Devon furious, especially the one where he showed off his body in his office. It was hard to look at. One photo of Imani pierced Devon's heart. She looked so perfect. The article even mentioned him, though he wasn't named. He was just described as the other man, a minor detail in Tyson's story. Tyson's new wife was supposedly helping him with his past struggles, and they even went on a honeymoon in Italy, where he was treated like a star too. "Why?" Devon screamed, his frustration growing as his headache intensified. The drinks weren't helping. He searched for another bottle, realizing it must have slipped under the seat. He felt the car drift off the road and quickly steered back to safety. The rush of adrenaline cleared his mind a bit, but his headache only worsened. Tyson was to blame for that pain in his head, too. The harm he caused left Devon unable to work, depending on his medical insurance and savings to get by. Devon knew what he needed to do. He was determined to fix everything in his life. He had borrowed a powerful weapon from a friend, and he was driving back to that college town to confront the past. He felt that Tyson should not still be alive after what happened to Imani. It was unfair. The only person who should be remembered was Imani. He wondered why he had to fall in love with her. "Why did you leave me?" he asked, his voice full of emotion. "I'm sorry, Devon," came the quiet reply. With blurred vision, he looked to the empty seat beside him, and in his mind, she was there, beautiful and sorrowful. "I've missed you so much," he mumbled, wishing for her presence. "I know," she responded softly. "Are you back to be with me?" he asked. "No, I love Tyson." "Ugh, I can't stand him. He doesn't deserve to live." "Devon, do you still care for me?" He gazed at the image of her in his mind, and he couldn't turn away. She was everything. His car sped along the road when it suddenly clipped the rocky cliff. The front of the car crumpled as it swerved dangerously to the left, crossing into oncoming traffic. A driver of a fast car barely managed to steer away. Instead of a direct hit, the other car struck the bottom of Devon's vehicle, causing it to lift off the ground and fly over the guardrail. Devon felt secure in his seat, but dizzy as the car soared through the air toward the ocean below. He glanced to his right and saw Imani's sad eyes looking back at him. "The ocean is waiting for you." Tyson emerged from the lake, shaking the cold water from his hair. He had swum halfway across and felt proud of his progress before deciding to return. As he walked up toward the patio, he sensed someone watching him. Barbara was on her roof deck with binoculars, but he wasn't going to change his routine because of her. The other gaze belonged to Ashley, and her eyes sparkled with happiness as she saw him coming. "You look like a hero from a tale," she said with a grin. He laughed, accepting a towel from her when he reached the little table. "Is that for your next story?" he asked, and she nodded. She had become quite the talented writer since they got married. Tyson moved the patio furniture closer to the house, creating a private space away from prying eyes. Now the only ones who might see them would have to be out on the lake. As he dried off, Ashley leaned closer, eager to greet him in her own special way. He noted how much she enjoyed their moments together, and he appreciated her enthusiasm. He knew once she found her rhythm, it would be hard to resist her charm. "Ashley!" Tyson stood there, speechless, a mix of surprise and confusion on his face. He had never expected to see Christy again, especially not like this. "Who is it, dear?" Ashley called from the living room, breaking his moment of shock. "It's Christy," Tyson replied, stepping back to let her in. He noticed she was trying hard not to cry. As Ashley entered the room, her eyes widened. On Christy's hip was a young boy, maybe 18 months old. He had striking blue eyes like his mother, but his other features strongly resembled Tyson's, with curly hair that was long and loose. "Is this why you didn't come to the wedding?" Tyson asked quietly, trying to process everything. Christy nodded, looking a bit shaky. Ashley quickly regained her composure. "He's adorable. What's his name?" With a relieved smile, Christy replied, "Aiden." "Can I hold him?" Ashley asked eagerly. Christy nodded and carefully placed Aiden into Ashley's arms. The moment was heartwarming as the older woman smiled down at the boy, who responded with a sweet grin. "Oh my, he's a charmer just like his dad," Ashley said, glancing at Tyson, who was still trying to take it all in. "Maybe you and Christy can chat about this out on the patio while I play with this little one," Both Tyson and Christy nodded slightly and stepped outside to the patio. Once seated, Tyson broke the silence. "How do you spell his name?" "A. Iden," Christy answered quickly. "So, my father's name," Tyson murmured, struggling to understand. "Why didn't you tell me?" Christy looked down, her hands in her lap. "When I visited you that weekend, I was going through a tough time. I mentioned my boyfriend, but I had actually ended that relationship months earlier. I wanted to be with you, but I was also focused on my career. I made a lot of mistakes. I stopped using my birth control after we broke up, so that weekend I was fertile. We spent a lot of time together, and it was wonderful. We talked, and your support helped me clear my head. I realized I needed to focus on my job." She took a few deep breaths as the words spilled out. Once she felt calmer, she went on. "I thought about taking the day after pill, but I just couldn't do it. When I found out I was pregnant, I knew I had to keep the baby. He's a part of you that I can have in my life. I can't love him more." Tyson was shocked by her words. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked again. Christy shook her head. "I didn't want you to feel responsible. You made it clear that you didn't want to be with me." "I never said that. But let's be real. I'm in my 60s, and you're in your 20s. You deserve someone who can share your future. You're young and have so much ahead of you. Be patient and stay open to love." She nodded, but her lips trembled. His heart ached for her. He pulled his chair back and opened his arms. She quickly moved to sit on his lap, tears flowing as he held her gently. They stayed that way for a bit until Christy calmed down. "I always feel better when I'm with you," Christy said softly. "You will find someone who can offer you comfort and more. I'll always be your friend and support you. But now, that special love is for Ashley." They sat quietly, enjoying the warmth of each other's presence. Christy stood and went back to her chair. "Why now?" Tyson asked. Christy smiled weakly and lifted her chin. "Remember when I said my company was expanding to Europe?" He nodded. "I had to pass on the job then because I was pregnant. It's come up again, and now it's not just Europe. It's global. They want me, but it means I'd have to travel a lot. I wouldn't be home for more than 1 week out of 4. The pay is more than double what I earn now, and the experience would be huge. I can't let this opportunity slip away." "But you have Aiden." "Yes, I can't take him with me, and I don't have anyone to care for him. I came back to introduce him to my parents. They didn't know either." Tyson raised his eyebrows. "You didn't tell your parents. How did it go when you did?" "Dad isn't talking to me, and Mom is upset that she missed his early days, but she's happy to have a grandson. Aiden really won her over." She sighed. "Mom says Dad just needs time. She believes he'll come around, but I know he holds on to things." Tyson nodded. "You were going to ask them to help with him?" "No, I wanted to ask if you could. Aiden needs his dad." Tyson's eyes widened in surprise. "I've never been a dad before. I've never been a mom before, and I had to do it on my own." She raised her hands in a gesture of surrender. "I know this was my choice. I really need help now." Tyson could see that it was hard for this young woman to ask for help. "We need to decide this together. Ashley also has a say. Let's go back inside." They walked back into the house and heard the happy laughter of a little boy. They found him playing on the living room floor with Ashley, who smiled brightly at them. "He's so clever." She waved for Tyson to sit on the floor next to her. He joined her as Christy sat on his other side. Aiden quickly crawled onto Tyson's lap, reaching up to him. Tyson helped the boy stand, and Aiden eagerly played with his hair, chatting with excitement as he explored it. He looked over at his mom and grabbed a handful of his own hair. Christy had tears of joy in her eyes as she nodded at her son. "Yes, he has hair just like yours. He's your dad." "Da?" Aiden asked. Christy gasped in surprise and more joyful tears fell. "Yes, Daddy." Tyson was amazed at the thought that this bright little guy was his child. He never expected to have children, especially not one so wonderful. But maybe he was just being a bit biased. He turned to Ashley. "Christy has a job opportunity that she can't miss. She's asking us to look after Aiden while she travels." "Yes," Ashley excitedly responded. Tyson looked surprised at Ashley. "That means we'll have to change our schedules a lot." He turned to Christy. "How long will you be working in this new job?" She looked into his eyes. 2 to 5 years, but if it goes well, it might take longer. I'll spend all my free time with Aiden when I'm not traveling. Tyson nodded, glancing at Ashley. This house isn't really ready for another person. Ashley smiled. That's the easy part. The spare room we cleaned out for my writing can quickly be turned back into a bedroom. We could do that in no time. Where will you stay tonight? She asked Christy. I was planning to get a hotel, she answered. No, you can stay here, Ashley insisted joyfully. She turned to Tyson. Christy and I will go into town to buy a bed and have it brought over this afternoon. Should we get a crib for Aiden, too? I actually have his crib and all his things in my van, Christy said shyly. Tyson raised his eyebrows in surprise, and Aiden curiously reached for him. Ashley's face lit up again. That's perfect. Are you sure I'm not a burden? I mean, you just got married, and now I'm asking you to look after my child, Christy said. Ashley took Christy's hand reassuringly. I always wanted children, even if I couldn't have my own. Now that I'm married to the man I should have always been with, it feels like it's too late. Aiden's arrival is perfect timing. She noticed the worry on the younger woman's face and tried to reassure her. I'm not trying to be his mother. That will always be you. I just have a lot of love to give that I've never had a chance to show. Christy had happy tears in her eyes again. Thank you. The two women hugged and then quickly went to the spare bedroom to plan its change back into a bedroom. Tyson and Aiden stayed in the living room looking at each other while the two women were busy. Tyson smiled at his son, who still had his small hands in his dad's hair. Aiden giggled at his dad's smile and bounced cheerfully on his little legs. Da, da, da! A strange feeling rushed through him. It felt new and different. When it passed, he knew he would do anything to protect this little boy and make sure he was happy. He hugged Aiden tightly and playfully sniffed his neck. The boy burst into giggles. Tyson kissed the boy's cheeks. Little arms wrapped around his neck, and he got a kiss on his cheek in return. Feeling watched, he turned to see Ashley and Christy in the doorway, smiling at him playing with Aiden. Tyson raised an eyebrow at Ashley, and she understood the signal. She looked at Christy, who blushed a little. Let's go check what's in your minivan, Ashley said, taking Christy's hand to lead her outside. Since you're letting me be involved in raising your son, we should talk about how this will work. Then they went outside, leaving Tyson surprised. He looked back at Aiden, who was copying Tyson's shocked face. My first lesson for you, always let the women handle the talking. Aiden burst into laughter at Tyson's serious look. Is it too early for those lessons? Tyson asked, nodding his head. Aiden nodded in response. Happy wife, happy life? Tyson asked, and Aiden nodded again. Tyson laughed with joy. Son, I think this is the start of something truly wonderful. Hey everyone! Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss any of the exciting stories we have coming up. What do you think about the characters in this story? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear from you.